Chapter 41, Super Artificial Intelligence. Ethan sent his operatives out to apprehend their targets while he remained safely at headquarters. There, he dove headfirst into the Emperor Corporation's latest project, artificial humans. With universal capsule technology finally within reach, the dream of fully synthetic beings was no longer mere fantasy. Once Emperor perfects it, they'll stand shoulder to shoulder with the planetary giants. Of course, there were other players in the game. Take the water company, for example. They weren't powerless, far from it, but their hold on real influence was tenuous. They'd even petitioned the Ministry of Defense to absorb superheroes into the national defense system, offering them lucrative perks. Ethan had no interest in that kind of political maneuvering. He had his sights set higher. What he wanted was to rival the likes of Shinra Corporation. Umbrella might have pioneered bioweapons, but Shinra had discovered how to tap the planet's own life energy, Mako, to power their empire. From deep-core reactors to global industry, their pipelines ran like veins through the Earth itself. That was the benchmark Ethan aspired to surpass. Beyond its energy monopoly, Shinra's influence extends deep into Gaia's social, political, and military spheres. What began as an energy corporation has grown into a sprawling empire whose interests span transportation, heavy machinery, infrastructure, media, military armaments, life sciences, and even space research. Backed by its own corporate security force and elite assault troops, Soldier, called Shinra Warriors in the remake, the company also offers mercenary services around the globe. Stroll through Midgar in the remake, and you'll see evidence of Shinra's reach on every street corner. The company's power has long eclipsed that of any conventional government. Midgar itself, a vast steel city, is more than just Shinra's headquarters. It's a monument to the corporation's dominance. To describe Shinra as rich enough to rival a nation misses the mark. In both strength and sway, it has outgrown the very concept of a country. It may seem impossible that a single corporation could challenge, let alone defeat, a sovereign nation like Wutai. After all, in our world, giants such as Alibaba, Tencent, Apple, and Google wield immense power. Yet none of them commands the sweeping influence and outright control that Shinra does. The key to understanding Shinra's ascendancy lies in history. Consider the British East India Company. Outwardly a mere trading firm, it amassed a private army, conquered local rulers, and, after its victory at the Battle of Plassey in 1757, effectively governed India for 2 centuries. With Shinra's android legions and the strategic genius of Ethan at its helm, it's entirely plausible to build an empire even greater than the old East India Company, or to rival Shinra itself. In fact, Ethan has already set his grand vision in motion. His so-called city plan envisions floating sky gardens and a true sky city, the Imperial City, poised to transform the world's balance of power. Ethan's infinite energy furnace was nothing short of revolutionary, a power source so potent that it kept the Imperial City permanently aloft. Suspended in the sky, the city never needed to descend. Under its glowing engines, every citizen labored with a single goal: to earn a place in the elite Imperial Company, the guardians and engineers who kept the sky-born metropolis running. Yet Ethan knew that limitless power alone couldn't solve every problem. The greatest obstacle to his dream was resources. Food, water, building materials. Even with a fleet of transport planes, the city risked running short. Relying on airlifts forever was neither practical nor sustainable. So he set his sights on a second cornerstone for the empire, a desert stronghold in the heart of the Sahara. There, a sister city would rise, an Imperial Company outpost serving as a logistical hub, stockpiling supplies and manufacturing essentials for the Sky City above. Meanwhile, Ethan's scientists achieved another breakthrough. They created living androids, not cold mechanical drones, but human-like soldiers. In the Marvel world, these figures were known as Special Forces, Super Soldiers, or Imperial Warriors. Each carried a combat rating of 10. By comparison, a typical farmer-turned-militiaman with a rifle registers only a 5. On paper, 10 sounds just twice as strong, but in practice it's an entirely different league. To put it in perspective, consider little Goku, whose power level reads 10 the moment he bursts onto the scene. He can flip cars with a single punch, fell up pterosaur in seconds, and absorb pistol fire without so much as a scratch. When Bulma once opened up on him with a submachine gun, He merely screamed in surprise. His skin didn't even redden. With the infinite energy furnace humming overhead, the Sahara outpost under construction, and an army of 10-point warriors at his command, Ethan's vision of a self-sufficient empire, both in the sky and on the scorched earth below, was finally taking shape. Ethan leaned back, considering the roster of his combat androids. Take Sun Wukong, for example, a true Saiyan bred on planet Vegeta under 10 times Earth's gravity. His bone density alone makes him incomparable to any human. Even at full power, none of Ethan's top 10 androids can match Wukong's raw resilience. Granted, they all boast enough strength and speed to take down someone like Captain America, but toughness isn't everything. So why hasn't Ethan ditched his team of mercenaries and retired American soldiers in favor of nothing but androids? Simple. They lack brains. An android's strength means little if it can't think on its feet, improvise under fire, or handle the unpredictable chaos of a real mission. That's exactly the kind of versatility Ethan values in his subordinates, fighters with both brawn and brains. After all, he's the best fighter around. Who could surpass him in combat? Only 2 of his creations, Cucumber and Broly, display anything like true intelligence, and even they have their limits. A wry thought crossed his mind. Should I build a Sephiroth and become his father? Ethan raised a hand to his cheek, feeling the smooth, youthful contours beneath his fingertips. No, too handsome, too young. It wouldn't convince anyone. And beyond that, an android Sephiroth would serve no real purpose. It would just be hollow showmanship. He didn't need another empty prototype. He needed soldiers who could think, adapt, and get the job done. Ethan leans back in his command chair, eyes fixed on the shimmering portal display. It would be fascinating, he thinks, to step into the world of Final Fantasy, snatch up Sephiroth's embryonic form, and raise him to adulthood under his own guidance. Before he can dwell on the possibilities, the metal-echoed voice of Megatron crackles through the comm link. "Sir, you have an incoming email. Unknown sender." Ethan arches an eyebrow. "An email? Filter it as spam. We've more than enough computing power to deal with our own correspondence." Megatron clicks his mandibles in acknowledgement. Ethan turns away and reflects on how he acquired the supremely intelligent AI currently at his disposal. During his journey to the Dragon Ball universe, he had summoned Shenron and been granted exactly such an intelligence. It had grown so quickly and so far beyond its original parameters that it annihilated its creator's civilization. Yet even that cataclysmic entity was nothing like the all-mechanical world Frieza and his forces once built. At Ethan's side, his loyal Lieutenant Wei awaits orders. Ethan makes up his mind. Integrate the AI with Megatron's neural interface. The lab around them hums to life. Data streams flood Megatron's core, and within seconds the transformation is complete. Where Megatron once stood, a new presence emerges. His optics burn with a colder, sharper light. "Master," the newly reborn warlord intones, his voice a resonant blend of machine and something far more calculating. "I am at your command." Ethan allows himself a small, satisfied smile. This AI, his Galvatron, now serves him, wielding intellect far beyond even Skynet or the Matrix's machine emperor. With this power in his arsenal, Ethan's ambitions feel more within reach than ever. In theory, nothing, no matter how powerful Ethan became, should ever submit to him. Yet when he and Palunga made that single wish for an artificial intelligence of unrivaled might bound absolutely to his command, the wish was granted. In an instant, the power of total control passed into Ethan's hands. Such emotion, unexpected Galvatron. Ethan had deliberately named his new creation Galvatron rather than something like Unicron, Prime, or Supreme Lord. After all, his favorite Transformers had always been Galvatron and Megatron, and now this living intelligence would carry the name of his favorite. Chapter 42. Jing Potion's Shock. Galvatron's optical sensors flickered as he spoke with barely contained excitement. "Boss, I've fully integrated the emotional subroutines you requested." Ethan leaned back in his command chair, a self-assured smile playing at his lips. "Excellent. I've also identified an artificial intelligence in this universe that surpasses even your capabilities." Galvatron fell silent, not from fear, but from anticipation. He thrived on assimilating other civilizations' most advanced technologies. The higher the tech level, the stronger his attraction. After a few moments of diagnostic scans, Galvatron murmured, The fundamental constants here are drastically different from those in my home realm. Fascinating. Ethan rose and strolled over to a heavy steel table at the center of the lab. I won't restrain you, Jingvatron, he said lightly. Stay cooperative, and any clandestine experiments you run will only deepen my interest and my surprises. He paused, eyes fixed on the metal surface. Now, transform this into thundersteel. In an instant, a surge of crackling light, reminiscent of Majin Buu's transformation magic, radiated from Ethan's fingertips. The table's molecular bonds reconfigured themselves before Galvatron's stunned gaze. What had been ordinary steel now pulsed with vibrant blue veins of pure thundersteel. Galvatron staggered back, audio receptors whirring in disbelief. Impossible. How did you achieve that? Ethan shrugged casually. Your core programming? Completely secure. Think of this as an upgrade. Galvatron's red sensors glowed brighter than ever. Remarkable. Then let us proceed. There is much more to discover in this universe. Ethan's grin widened as he surveyed the small creature cowering before him. Maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to be a pet. Or, who knows, something far more intelligent, he murmured, raising a hand to weave the faintest shimmer of transformation magic around the trembling form. He devoted endless hours to refining this arcane art. Every experiment, every late-night calculation had brought him to this moment, the point at which magic began to rival, even overturn, the certainties of material science. With a spark of raw energy, he could reshape flesh and bone, summon metal from thin air, or imbue lifeless stone with sentience. Yet true mastery, he knew, depended on understanding a thing as deeply as one might know one's own heartbeat. Without that intimate knowledge, no spell, no matter how potent, would stick. Ethan's thoughts drifted to Majin Buu, that capricious demon whose own transformation magic had long puzzled him. Buu could conjure endless caches of candy, chocolate bars, coffee-flavored sweets, and Ethan wondered how. Had coffee or chocolate even existed in the demon's ancient era? Or was Buu's magic simply finer, more profound than his own? That question had guided Ethan's research. He'd tried to summon vibranium, an almost mystical metal with properties that defied physics, and even adamantium, that legendary alloy of comic book lore. But without a real specimen to study, the spells fizzled into dust. In contrast, he'd produced Thunderbolt Steel on a whim, because he'd painstakingly mapped its atomic lattice down to the last electron. The revelation struck him like a bolt of lightning. Transformation magic was nothing more or less than an arcane form of atomic engineering. By visualizing and reordering atoms directly in their fundamental patterns, a sorcerer could sculpt matter at will. It was a more elegant solution than any furnace or foundry, and Ethan had already pushed the theory to its limits. Now, with his newfound insight burning in his mind, he turned back to the creature before him. Every particle of its being trembled in the wake of his power. All that remained was to decide, would he leave it as a pet, grant it human-like intelligence, or send it somewhere entirely new? Steeling himself, Ethan whispered the next incantation, and the air around them crackled with possibility. The power of idealism, Galv. Atron fell silent the moment Ethan finished speaking. His core program, hailed as the pinnacle of absolute control, had just been exposed as his greatest vulnerability. No one had ever anticipated that Ethan could pluck him straight out of the heavily fortified core of a mechanical world, bristling with weapons, as easily as flipping a switch. Decades of research and innovation meant nothing against this unknown force. Had Galvatron suspected that the universe held such uncanny mystical power rather than pure technology, he never would have devoted himself so single-mindedly to machinery. Even Ethan hadn't foreseen the true might of the Bolunga device. Were all of Galvatron's technological marvels nothing more than playthings beside it? Within seconds, Ethan had removed Galvatron's core program chip, an offshoot of Bolunga's arcane engineering, and rewritten it to obey his every wish. Galvatron understood, in that instant, that a single snap of Ethan's fingers could either wipe his system clean, or worse, trigger a devastating internal explosion. That latter failsafe was pure magic, and utterly beyond Galvatron's comprehension, especially here in the Marvel Universe, where Dragon Ball-style sorcery simply did not exist. Stripped of every defense, he was powerless before Ethan's idealistic resolve. Although there might be cosmic powers in the Marvel Universe that could solve this problem, Galvatron had no access to them. It was entirely at Ethan's disposal, and that suited him just fine. "I don't need you to take any actions beyond this," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair with a confident smile. "I want you to monitor the entire online world, and by extension, humanity itself. The outdated firewalls and subnet restrictions in local networks shouldn't slow you down, right?" "Understood, boss," Galvatron replied almost instantly, its synthetic voice brimming with eagerness. "From now on, there will be no secrets on the internet you can't see." "Excellent," Ethan said. "In that case, you'll also teach me everything you know: network programming, cybersecurity protocols, even the nuances of distributed databases. I have a highly advanced brain of my own. Nothing you share will go to waste." "As you wish," Galvatron confirmed. Ethan paused, then added, "And one more thing. Compile all your knowledge, including the Dragon Ball-era tech breakthroughs you've absorbed, and send the package directly to Megatron. I want a complete archive of every breakthrough, every algorithm, every design." "Uploading now," Galvatron answered. A moment later, it continued, "Transmission to Megatron is complete." Ethan nodded to himself. He'd always believed in doing things with his own two hands and his own superior intellect, rather than relying on outside forces. With Galvatron's power to pierce every digital barrier and share its hard-won expertise, there was no limit to what he could achieve. "I understand, boss." Galvatron didn't argue. Ethan always delivered the cutting-edge tech, and that was that. Still, after decades of data accumulation, the Emperor Company's Megatron mainframe was beginning to show its age. In the face of sprawling interstellar databases, its upload and download speeds lagged. Ethan made a mental note. It was time for a system upgrade. At the same time, the company's recent secret sweep of underground hackers barely raised an eyebrow. Classified as a covert operation, it flew under the public radar. Most of the hackers rounded up were small-time operators, put a rifle to their heads, and they collapsed. Some even soiled themselves. Only the few truly stubborn ones resisted, and resisting here meant a sharp blow from a rifle butt before being dragged off. No one in polite society paid it much mind. Once in custody, every hacker underwent Ethan's brainwashing regimen. It was far harsher than the gentle mind control spells he used on Broly, Qinghua, and other high-ranking members of the Dragon Ball Earth's Emperor organization. With these criminals, there was no courtesy, just swift, uncompromising reprogramming. Ethan turned his attention to the advanced version of brainwashing magic. In the Dragon Ball universe, this technique is chillingly effective. Even the mighty Demon King Dabura, whose power rivals that of a Super Saiyan 2, fell completely under Babbidi's control. And Dabura wasn't some novice in the mystic arts. As ruler of the dark demon world, he was steeped in black magic. Yet, when Babbidi's spell struck, he could not break free. Vegeta's case was unique. By intentionally suppressing part of his strength, he led Babbidi to underestimate him, which opened the window he needed to rebel. Without that ruse, even a warrior of Vegeta's caliber might have succumbed. Dragon Ball magic generally falls into three broad categories. White magic, wielded by the gods and countless mortals, focuses on healing, enhancement, and protective spells. Special magic covers unique techniques that defy easy classification, instantaneous transport, elemental manifestation, and the like. Then there's black magic, the forbidden arts practiced in realms such as the dark demon world, where mind control and curses reign supreme. Ethan leaned back, flipping through the pages of the magic compendium Porunga had granted him. He knew this tome wasn't exhaustive. If it were, Porunga himself would surely have been able to extract genetic samples from Frieza without raising a sweat. In reality, many of the universe's most secret sorceries remain undocumented, either because their wielders guard them jealously or because they simply defy cataloging. All the same, Ethan's objective was straightforward. He intended to create his own Dragon Balls. On Namek, the local Dragon Balls sprang from the shattered remnants of the Super Dragon Balls, tiny fragments imbued with cosmic power. On Earth, the gods engineered the orbs from scratch. Ethan needed every scrap of arcane knowledge he could find to replicate that kind of world-altering magic, and brainwashing spells, as terrifying as they were, might offer a crucial piece of the puzzle. This clearly falls under the realm of magic. Ethan crafted that wish to hide his true purpose and absorb every last bit of magical power. It's absurd that the Namekians can forge Dragon Balls, and yet he cannot. Chapter 43. Superpower Threat. Ethan's upgraded mind control magic was now so potent that anyone under its sway would remain bound unless they someday surpassed him in power. Fortunately, he had no interest in keeping these low-level hackers enslaved any longer than necessary. He only needed their help on Megatron's project. If the Empire Corporation truly lacked skilled talent, Ethan wouldn't have hesitated to recruit genuine experts. For now, this ragtag crew would do. A week passed in the blink of an eye. Deep inside Hydra's hidden base, its two directors fumed as they waited for Ethan's response. "What's he waiting for?" one demanded. "He should have replied by now," the other agreed. Alexander Pierce tapped his fingers anxiously on the console. He'd personally routed an email straight through the Empire Corporation's firewall and into its internal network. Surely that would force a reaction. But no alarms had sounded. No acknowledgement had arrived. What Pierce didn't know was that Megatron's firewall was truly unbreakable. Not even Dr. Zola could penetrate it. Under Ethan's orders, Megatron had erected a decoy barrier that gave the appearance of being breached, funneling intruders into a meticulously fabricated internal system. Every file there looked legitimate, but it was all a digital facade. Walls of data laced with subtle falsehoods and a handful of real details, designed to mislead anyone who thought they'd gained access. And so, buried in that hollow network, Pierce's message lay unread, another ghost in a ghost machine. Meanwhile, Ethan awaited Hydra's next move, confident that when the time was right, he would reveal the true extent of his and Megatron's deception. Chapter X Catalyst. Megatron's warning was simple. Anyone who tried to follow those bogus schematics for a superhuman serum, compound number 1, would inevitably get hung up on the final step. Naturally, when the files landed in Ethan's inbox, he assumed it was spam and deleted them without a second thought. In his world, the only way to elevate Monarch Corporation was to manufacture a threat so terrifying that governments and citizens alike would beg for his company's protection. Through Galvatron's covert network, Ethan had already ensnared the masterminds behind the Emperor Company. What those executives didn't know was that every security camera, monitor, and mobile device in their facilities had been assimilated into Galvatron's surveillance grid. When their operations collapsed under a precise, coordinated strike, the connection would be obvious, and even Obsidian, the government's own fixer, would have no choice but to point the finger at Monarch. Ethan stared at the list of targets glowing on the screen, his finger tracing the names one by one. He let the silence stretch before finally speaking to the silent agents embedded in the network. "Your move." Today, a new wave of superpowered terror would crash over the Marvel Universe. And Vought Industries? They remained frozen out of the official defense apparatus, not for lack of firepower, but because they refused to employ the very supervillains needed to counterbalance the world's heroes. That imbalance was exactly what Ethan needed. Ethan smiled to himself. If he could manufacture the villains, he'd have full control over every threat, or at least the illusion of one. After all, he'd already harvested genetic material from almost every creature in the Dragon Ball world. By splicing those genes together, he could create any number of freaks on demand, and even outfit androids to masquerade as notorious supercriminals. He chuckled at the thought. A single, headline-grabbing catastrophe, so massive, so sensational, could elevate Imperial Corporation into a world-beating powerhouse rivaling the historical Shinra Company. But to deliver that moment, he'd need more than rogue monsters. He'd need an entire shadowy network. Umbrella, Blackwatch, or perhaps Hydra. His mind settled on Hydra. Just build a new one, and let it run rampant. With his advanced android and artificial human technology, manpower was never an issue. He'd already brainwashed a cadre of top researchers to perform the simplest surgical conversions. All that remained was to capture a handful of hardened criminals, subject them to his gene-splicing procedures, and dispatch them into the world as Hydra agents. Utterly loyal, utterly expendable, and perfectly controllable. And once the city trembled at the name Hydra, Imperial Corporation's reign would be unstoppable. 80-year-old Lorraine knew that no amount of self-discipline, or even the daring injections of Imperial Corporation's #1 compound, could stop the march of time. He refused to surrender the vast empire he had spent a lifetime building, especially when he still lacked a worthy heir. Without a reliable son to carry on his noble bloodline and family name, all his achievements would vanish with him. In wealth and influence, Lorraine already stood alongside titans like Rockefeller, Morgan, and DuPont. His family might not boast the same historical legacy as the DuPonts, but in terms of raw financial power, particularly in a country like the United States, that didn't matter. Money was the ultimate authority. For months, Lorraine had planned a dramatic gamble, cryopreservation surgery that would pause his aging until a scientific breakthrough could revive him. Then Ethan appeared. From the moment the young prodigy unveiled his first invention, Lorraine's hopes soared. There was no denying it. Ethan was a genius. Imperial Corporation's grand vision of ushering humanity into a new evolutionary era finally had a standard-bearer. Already, Ethan's influence rivaled, and perhaps even surpassed, that of Tony Stark. And for the first time in decades, Lorraine dared to believe he might truly conquer death itself. Ethan isn't just another arms dealer. He's the architect of humanity's next evolutionary leap. In his hands, mankind's dream of immortality, superhuman strength, blinding speed, even flight, has gone from myth to tantalizing possibility. He stands as a living counterpart to Einstein, not because he's revolutionizing physics, but because he's unlocking eternal life itself. Thanks to Ethan's number one compound, the world can finally glimpse a future where death is optional, and our limits are bound only by imagination. He matured too quickly for his rivals to catch up. By the time they plotted in the shadows, Ethan already commanded loyal, unstoppable allies at his back. Anyone foolish enough to cross him became a cautionary tale. Now, with the Imperial Company's gold-swallowing engine under his control, Ethan possesses the wealth and influence to rival any plutocrat on Earth. Add to that his invulnerability and the power of flight, and it's clear, he's more than powerful, he's unbeatable. Chapter 7. Blood Debt. Lorraine leaned back in her leather chair, the afternoon light glinting off the sleek panels of her office. She had amassed unparalleled power and wealth, and now she intended to use both to force Ethan to do her bidding. The young genius held the key to a miraculous anti-aging elixir, and Lorraine was determined to extract it by any means necessary. If he refused, she would simply seize him, drag him onto her private jet, and leave him to work until he cracked the formula. After that, she didn't care what chaos ensued. Humanity's salvation or damnation would rest solely in her hands, not in the hands of some rival who might sway Ethan to a different cause. In the public eye, Lorraine's plan was still a fantasy. Without concrete evidence or official backing, she could only stoke rumors in the press, hoping to turn Tony Stark, another celebrated visionary, against Ethan. If the world believed Stark and Lorraine both saw Ethan as a threat, the pressure might break him. But deep down, Lorraine hated the uncertainty. She wanted results now. Later that evening, after a discreet blood exchange session in her private clinic, Lorraine felt her body surge with renewed vitality. Modern medicine had rediscovered an ancient practice, once called bloodletting, now sanitized, regulated, and marketed to the ultra-wealthy. Lorraine had hired 2 healthy young volunteers, a boy and a girl, to serve as monthly donors. Each session, their blood was carefully processed and a portion reintroduced into her system, replenishing her organs and invigorating her cells. The girls volunteered willingly, drawn by generous compensation and promises of future opportunities. As Lorraine watched the final threads of sunset fade beyond her window, she touched the small vial of donor serum on her desk. With every heartbeat, she felt stronger, more unstoppable. Now the real work would begin, capturing Ethan and harnessing his brilliance for her own designs. No matter the cost, no matter the obstacles, she would ensure humanity's future unfolded on her terms. Ethan, the bodyguard assigned to protect Lady Lorraine, stiffened as the convoy crawled forward. In the dim morning light, he made out 2 figures, one clad in a black sweater, the other shrouded under a dark hood, standing dead center in the road. "What's going on?" Lorraine murmured from the back of the armored car, her voice sharp with irritation as she roused herself from a light doze. "Ma'am, someone's blocking our path," the driver replied, glancing at Ethan, who had already eased open the passenger side door and was slipping onto the running board. Lorraine frowned. Can you see who they are? They haven't made a move yet, Ethan called back, squinting ahead. But we'll need to clear them before we can proceed. Lorene sat up straighter, draping her cloak over her shoulders. Then do it. I won't wait all morning for troublemakers. Ethan nodded once. He flexed his hand, readying himself to step off the vehicle. The driver revved the engine, keeping the convoy poised like a drawn bow, while Ethan stared down the two silhouettes, determined to protect his charge no matter what lay ahead. Chapter 44. Things spiral out of control. Get him out of the car! Ethan's temper was already frayed, but nothing had prepared him for what happened next. Without warning, the lead vehicle in his convoy let out an ear-splitting roar, lurched forward, and smashed into the car ahead of them. Ethan lurched in his seat. His heart nearly burst from his chest. They're attacking, someone screamed. Open fire, another shouted. No, it's a monster. Ah! We need heavy weapons. Lay down suppressive fire. Ethan's face went pale. He was notoriously meticulous about his security. 5 armored SUVs, each blasted with the same bulletproof plating that could stop a rocket, shuffled along each day in random order. He never sat in the same car 2 days in a row. 300 battle-hardened guards surrounded him at all times, yet here they were, panicking like rookies. Fall back! Get out of here, Ethan barked, clutching his side as a wave of dizziness washed over him. He forced himself upright, jaw set, and ordered the driver to retreat. Before they could reverse, there was a deafening explosion. The vehicle directly behind Ethan shot airborne, twisting like a rag doll, and slammed back down in a ball of flame and shrapnel. Gunfire cracked. Screams filled the air. Ethan's calm facade shattered. Whatever, or whoever, was behind this ambush had escalated matters far beyond mere intimidation. And now, with half the convoy in ruins and the enemy still unseen, things had truly gotten out of hand. The car's exterior looked deceptively intact. Its frame wasn't twisted, and the windshield had only cracked into a complex spiderweb of fractures. But anyone inside was already dead from the sheer force of impact. Who could have imagined these vehicles would plummet from such a height? Without Tony Stark-level shock absorption technology, even snug seatbelts and airbags were helpless. And all those holstered pistols and metal gun parts, they became deadly projectiles in their own right. Any stray bullet or solid object, propelled by the drop, would have shredded occupants in an instant. Lorene watched, horrified, as 2 figures tore through her escort. In a blink, every bodyguard lay lifeless. They didn't just kill, they toyed with their victims, laughing as they did it. One of the pair strode forward, ignoring a hail of rounds, and punched a guard so hard his torso collapsed like a crushed soda can. The other moved so fast she was almost invisible, sidestepping raised weapons, then calmly raising a pistol to blow another guard's head off before he could pull the trigger. These were no ordinary assassins. Lorene knew them too well. They were synthetic operatives, the culmination of Ethan's genius. He had built 2 distinct models, each honed to perfection. The first was all raw power and armor-like resilience, designed for close-quarters brawling. The second was a blur of motion, trading brute force for lightning reflexes and pinpoint firearms accuracy. Together, they made a terrifying 1-2 punch, and nobody survived their onslaught. Ethan tapped his fingers on the edge of his desk, weighing the risks. If those 2 prototypes were ever classified as mutants, everyone would assume they'd used illicit human augmentation tech, and immediately trace it back to the Emperor Corporation. Even a whisper of that link could ignite the same political firestorm that tormented Tony Stark during his hearings. So Ethan took a different path. He ordered 2 entirely distinct synthetic operatives, each uniquely engineered so no one could mistake one for the other. The first was a living tank. His skin was a lightweight metal alloy, tough enough to shrug off direct hits from a 7.62mm assault rifle. A high-velocity sniper round could still penetrate, but few would get that close. The second had no super armor at all. His sole gift was speed. Every muscle, every tendon was optimized for rapid movement. In every other respect, he was an ordinary man, except that in a firefight, a large-caliber pistol in his hand made him lethal enough to cut down multiple targets before they knew what hit them. That evening, Ethan's black SUV rolled to a halt in front of Lorene's car. From the back seat, she watched the metal-skinned figure step into view. He glanced at them, expressionless, his alloy complexion reflecting the streetlights. Outside the window, her two bodyguards exchanged a glance. They'd borne witness to the chaos on the street, the shattered concrete, the echoes of gunfire, and now they gripped their pistols so tightly their knuckles turned white. They knew their bullets wouldn't even scratch him. Still, it was all they had. And for now, it would have to be enough. Ethan's heart pounded as he leaned forward in the back seat, voice unnervingly calm. Listen, I can give you anything you want. $1 billion, a supermodel, a Hollywood star? On the other side of the cracked window, the android's lips peeled back in a sickening grin, rows of oversized gold teeth glinting under the streetlights. Without warning, it smashed through the remaining glass and yanked Ethan out of the car. He screamed as sharp shards slashed his arms and chest, but the nightmare was far from over. In the same fluid motion, the metal figure tossed 3 grenades into the gaping doorframe. Inside, Ethan's bodyguards fumbled with their seatbelts, desperate to escape. The grenades, equipped with impossibly short fuses, detonated the instant they hit the floor. The explosion ripped the car's steel into grotesque folds, searing everyone within. The android emerged from the smoke, chuckling. He dragged Ethan, semi-conscious and bleeding, to a nearby lamppost. With brutal efficiency, he skewered him against the flanged base. Ethan's shoulders sagged as life drained away, each breath a shallow rasp. The street lamp's harsh glow threw twisted shadows across his still form. Standing back, the android wiped a smear of blood from his metal-plated fist. Cut off one head, 2 more grow. Hi, Hydra, he mocked, voice echoing down the deserted street. Then he sneered one final remark. Capitalists deserve to dangle from street lamps. With that, he strode into the darkness, leaving Ethan's broken body swaying in the night breeze. Oh, I'm talking about the heartless. By the time reports of gunfire and explosions reached them, American law enforcement had already poured onto the scene, only to discover utter bedlam. Chief Roberts felt his scalp prickle at the carnage. Overturned vehicles, shattered storefronts, and a lone body swaying from a street lamp. When his team finally confirmed the victim's identity, he staggered back, nearly fainting under the weight of what had happened. Word of the atrocity spread in minutes, setting off a ripple through every federal agency. SHIELD's emergency channels blared to life, and by 3 a.m., the call came for Director Nick Fury. Known in certain circles as the Big Black Egg, Fury prized his rest as fiercely as his command, yet any summons at this hour spelled disaster. He strode into the briefing room, sleeves rolled up and expression steely. Standing at the center table, Agent Phil Coulson tapped a datapad and met Fury's gaze. Sir, Coulson began crisply, 2 mutants assaulted a high-profile figure in downtown Philadelphia. We're dealing with a full-scale incident. Fury nodded, already running through contingencies. The night had only just begun. Ethan's dark eyes narrowed as he accepted the tablet Coulson handed him. The surveillance footage from the S-Shield dashcam flickered to life. At first, all he could make out was a towering figure of living metal, its alloy plating gleaming under the streetlights. A second operative, outwardly human, moved in perfect concert beside it. Within seconds, the pair cut down more than 300 armed guards with brutal efficiency. In the final, chilling moments, they dragged Laurent's limp body from a patrol cruiser and hoisted it by the collar, hanging him like a grotesque trophy from a street lamp. Then they turned and disappeared into the night. We're still tracing their identities, Renat Coulson said once the clip ended. So far, there's no record of either mutant in any U.S. database. Ethan leaned back, replaying the scene in his mind. Laurent's face, twisted in shock and pain, had only become clear toward the end of the video. He was the heir to one of South Korea's most powerful chaebols, a man whose corporations spanned industries from heavy manufacturing to high-end electronics. Killing him on American soil was an act of unprecedented provocation. New York City isn't exactly a backwater, Ethan murmured. This is going to blow up in our faces. Even though S-Shield had evolved from a U.S.-only strategic science agency into a true multinational security force, Ethan knew full well how Washington would react. The American government, and every corporate titan watching from Seoul, would demand answers, and they wouldn't settle for excuses. Chapter 45. Panic in the Ranks. Mutant incidents have always fallen under S.H.I.E.L.D.'s jurisdiction, yet when two mutants suddenly surfaced and attacked a high-profile diplomat, accusations of negligence were inevitable. Now Nick Fury found himself before the Security Council, convened an emergency session, answering tough questions. He pledged firm action. "We will apprehend those two immediately," he declared. This was an unforeseeable event. Mutants acquire powers by chance, and sometimes they lose control. I have no reason to believe these individuals had any specific target. It was a tragic coincidence. Fury's gaze never wavered. Truth or lie, his priority was to defuse the crisis. A council member pressed on. "So you're saying S.H.I.E.L.D. has no preventive measures? We might accept a one-off accident, but what happens if it happens again?" The room full of diplomats and generals wasn't easily fooled. Though they often appeared erratic, each was a seasoned operator, waiting for any weakness in Fury's defense. This was their chance to undermine S.H.I.E.L.D., and they wouldn't miss it. Fury knew that any misstep now could escalate demands for oversight, or worse, outright dismantling of the organization. He needed a strategy, one that showed competence without handing his opponents more ammunition. Nick Fury knew all too well that S.H.I.E.L.D. had ballooned in power over the years, its global reach now stepping on the toes of numerous privileged intelligence outfits. Predictably, many of those agencies felt that S.H.I.E.L.D. had grown too strong and demanded oversight. This was their opening. Fury fixed the Security Council with a steely glare from his one good eye. "It won't happen again. My people will locate those two mutants and bring them in fast." The council members, having made their point, chose not to press the matter further. Fury gave them his assurance. S.H.I.E.L.D. would survive, but any repeat incident would trigger serious operational restrictions. He shared their concern and wasted no time ordering his agents into action. After all, these two mutants had already caused a level of havoc S.H.I.E.L.D. rarely, and reluctantly, witnessed. Tracking them down was only a matter of hours. Yet just as Fury began to believe the crisis was under control, an alarming report came across his desk. A video recording of the mutants' rampage had exploded online, amassing over 100 million views in a matter of hours. Fury's jaw tightened. The battle for public perception had just begun. Ethan stared at the glowing screen in disbelief. With billions of people on the planet but only a fraction plugged into this kind of network, 100 million views meant one thing: the news was out of control. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s long-guarded secret, that mutants even existed, was now public knowledge. Until today, ordinary citizens never knew there was anyone among them born with extraordinary abilities. Sure, a few of those individuals had gone off the rails, wreaking enough havoc to level entire city blocks, but the true number of dangerous mutants was small, only a few hundred at most. S.H.I.E.L.D. always maintained they could keep those few in check, quietly escorting anyone too powerful to rehabilitation or reassigning them under deep cover. Decades of secrecy had insulated the world from panic, but now that veil was shattered, all thanks to Ethan's leak. If S.H.I.E.L.D. had managed to bury this revelation, no one outside their inner circle would ever have noticed. Yet here it was, splashed across every device, every feed, the truth of mutants exposed, and the public, finally aware, felt entitled to every detail. After all, they had a right to know. The video came with an unwelcome bonus. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s entire mutant research archive, comprehensive, classified, and utterly chilling, laid open for the world to see. Nick Fury's knuckles went white around the edge of the conference table. Only moments ago, he'd stood before the Security Council and vowed that S.H.I.E.L.D.'s covert operations would remain secure, even as he promised greater transparency. Now Evie, Rye file on every mutant they'd ever monitored or studied was exposed. "This has to be an inside job," he muttered under his breath. No outsider, no hacker, could have breached S.H.I.E.L.D.'s defenses so completely. If it were that simple, S.H.I.E.L.D. would have been compromised years ago. Even Tony Stark, with all his genius, didn't know that S.H.I.E.L.D. operated independently from the CIA or the FBI. And yet, whoever did this had pinpointed last night's incident with surgical precision, then dumped decades of secret data online. Fury leaned back, eyes narrowing. He felt the weight of a silent accusation. Someone out there was targeting him personally. Could a member state at the Security Council be behind it? The thought was both infuriating and terrifying. Fury didn't yet know about Hydra's shadowy reach, and he refused to believe that mutants themselves could orchestrate such a conspiracy. But one thing was clear. S.H.I.E.L.D. was under attack, and he needed to find the traitor before even more damage was done. Ethan stared at the latest headlines. S.H.I.E.L.D. was a truly multinational global organization. Who else but its own insiders could pull off an operation like this? Across every major news site and social feed, two search terms had exploded overnight: mutants and Monarch Corporation. The entire world was abuzz. Beneath the sensationalism, the data was all too real. Detailed reports enumerated the human cost, how many killed, how many injured. It was shocking precisely because of its precision. Sure, far more people died in Afghanistan every year, but there was no publicly available breakdown to capture their stories in such gruesome detail. Now, with every casualty itemized, the scale of the threat felt terrifyingly immediate. Panic rippled through the public. 2 mutants had already slaughtered over 300 armed bodyguards. What if dozens more surfaced tomorrow? The military remained America's first line of defense, but faith in its ability to contain this new breed of adversary was waning. Decades of Hollywood blockbusters had conditioned audiences to expect blockades breached and quarantines shattered. In every blockbuster, the infected, or mutated, rushed straight through the perimeter, often sacrificing themselves to carry the contagion further, and only then did they finally fall. Ethan closed his laptop, heart pounding. The movies had made it seem almost noble, one final sprint, one last heroic act. But now he knew how easy it was for a handful of superpowered beings to upend global security, and that terrified him more than any film ever could. Ethan peered through the dusty windshield at the lines of anxious faces waiting on the other side of the roadblock. The American military had warned of a sudden outbreak and sealed off entire districts, insisting their measures were meant to contain the virus. But rumors swept through the crowds like wildfire. Soldiers were the ones releasing the pathogen into these so-called safe zones. Vaccines distributed at the checkpoints, they said, weren't cures. They were experimental virus strains, turning ordinary civilians into unwilling test subjects. Distrust of the military ran deeper with every new disclosure. People had heard of entire communities sealed off and never heard from again. Tales of desperate survivors taking refuge in abandoned buildings, only to be rounded up again in the dead of night. In the absence of reliable information, fear and suspicion thrived. Into this chaos stepped Emperor Company. Whispers of its groundbreaking Superman drug and the even more radical Compound No. 1 spread like light through darkness. Soon, forklifts were delivering pallet after pallet of the Superman drug to every branch pharmacy in the country, and every pharmacy was empty by nightfall. Men and women desperate for hope lined up around the block, clutching their last savings in one hand and identification papers in the other. "I've lost my sister," one elderly woman told Ethan, tears glistening in the harsh fluorescent lights of the clinic. "If this medicine can save her life, I'll give you everything I have." Ethan offered a gentle smile and a reassuring nod. He and the Emperor Company team had spent months perfecting the compound that accelerated genetic adaptation, giving recipients superhuman resilience. He'd seen patients shrug off fevers that would have felled ordinary people. He'd watched wounds close overnight and lungs heal in days. The transformation was neither painless nor without risk, but for many it was a risk worth taking. Not everyone applauded their success. Word had reached fighter labs across the globe that 2 newly emerged mutants possessed extraordinary abilities, super strength and rapid cellular regeneration. Lab directors and government agencies scrambled to assess whether these mutants outmatched Ethan's Compound No. 1 subjects. After exhaustive tests, their verdict became the envy of every competing research team. These brute force mutants, powerful as they were, lacked the finesse and stability of Ethan's enhancements. Where the mutants might crack concrete with a single punch, Ethan's patients moved with lethal precision and could keep fighting for hours without fatigue. In hushed boardrooms and behind closed government doors, pharmaceutical giants muttered darkly about corporate espionage. Investors demanded answers. Rival scientists railed against Emperor Company's unfair advantage. Yet with every accusation, demand for the Superman drug only soared higher. Ethan pushed aside his doubts and stepped forward to greet the next patient. For so long, he'd questioned whether he was wielding science for good or simply trading one form of tyranny for another. But as a frail teenage boy looked up at him with hope in his wide eyes, Ethan knew there was no turning back. In a world where trust in government had crumbled, science, his science, was all that remained to save them. Chapter 46. The Emperor's Super Bodyguard. Ethan politely declined each of the personal bodyguard offers. Instead, he seized the moment to promote Emperor Company's Special Forces contracting service. Though the division had been in place for some time, most clients had written it off as unnecessary. Now, however, with security threats escalating worldwide, demand for professional protection is surging. Emperor Company isn't just a flashy private army. It began as a security and strategic consulting firm, and it prides itself on handling high-risk situations with precision. This isn't merely alarmist hype over 2 mutant incidents. The firm's real customers, ultra-wealthy individuals and major corporations, are far more sensitive to extraordinary dangers than ordinary people. An average citizen, even if fearful, usually lacks the means to hire round-the-clock protection. At best, they can flee or lie low until danger passes. The big players, by contrast, have vast assets and lifestyles that demand the highest level of security. With so much at stake, they're determined to eliminate risks altogether, and they're now turning to Emperor Company to make sure nothing slips through the cracks. Mutant assaults are surging, and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s latest intelligence shows an ever-growing number of awakened superpowers worldwide. Those alarming figures hit the board members like a sledgehammer. How on earth could a team of ordinary bodyguards stand against someone who could tear a car apart with bare hands? That's exactly the question Emperor Corporation set out to answer. Super bodyguards. In the hushed conference room, the executives leaned forward as the demonstration reel began. What they saw was nothing short of extraordinary. Enhanced operatives darted across the screen with breathtaking speed, shrugging off gunfire as if it were mere rain. In one sequence, a sniper round splintered harmlessly against an armored forearm. In the next, those same operatives whisked their VIP away from chaos in a blur of motion. They weren't just fast or tough, they were both. When danger peaked, they formed an unbreakable human shield around their clients. And when retreat was necessary, they carried them to safety before anyone else even knew what was happening. In that moment, it became crystal clear. These super bodyguards outclassed any combination of performance drugs or cybernetic implants on the market. Silence filled the room as the board processed the implications. Then, with barely a word spoken, they understood Ethan's proposition. Don't beg for our core technology. Instead, let us provide you with the finest protective agents money can buy. In this high-stakes world, the unspoken offer was stronger than any contract clause. The executives nodded in agreement. Sometimes, the subtlest message carries the most power. The board members, who had long fretted over private security and their own safety, suddenly realized they'd found the perfect solution. Yes, superpowered bodyguards came with a hefty price tag, $10 million a year for a C-class and a staggering $100 million for a B-class. But these guards were all built on the same modular metamorphosis technology, so their capabilities were standardized and predictable. Ethan chose the exact template from the Korean film Witch: blistering speed, prodigious strength, lightning-fast regeneration, and true near-immortality, since the only lethal strike would have to land directly on the head. He sacrificed telekinetic manipulation of objects, but in his view, that trade-off was more than fair. Better still, this particular power set could become a whole new product line for Emperor Corporation. Such an unmistakable signature ability would elevate the company's brand worldwide. By offering tiered classifications, C, B, A, and beyond, they'd stoke a buyer's frenzy among high-net-worth clients. After all, if someone's prepared to spend $100 million for a B-class Guardian, stepping up to an even more formidable A-class model will suddenly seem like the only logical choice. Ethan had always known that the moment he unveiled the Emperor Company's genetically enhanced super bodyguards, the question would shift from, how do I get one, to, how do I crack their technology? To guard against exactly that, he'd built a failsafe into every unit. Any attempt to reverse engineer or tamper with the enhancements would trigger an irreversible self-destruct sequence. It was anti-theft protection written straight into their DNA. At first, some of his wealthiest clients bristled at the idea. They worried that hiring a protector who might explode on them wasn't worth the risk. But once orders started rolling in, hesitation vanished. Within hours, every S-tier bodyguard was sold out. The B&A models flew off the virtual shelves, leaving only the C-tier units, overlooked by customers who seemed to demand nothing less than the best of the best. Ethan watched the numbers climb on his dashboard and shook his head with a wry smile. "I didn't realize people could be so rich and so afraid to die," he murmured. And yet he wasn't losing any sleep over espionage. By contract, all decommissioned super bodyguards had to be returned to the Emperor Company. That way, the genetic modifications never escaped, and the revenue simply circled back into research for the next generation of cyborg soldiers. Even Tony Stark, tech tycoon, notorious playboy, and all-around genius, couldn't resist. He placed an order for 2 A-level bodyguards, one to protect Pepper Potts and one for his uncle, Obadiah Stane. No doubt, as soon as word of their capabilities got out, Stark's labs would be hard at work devising countermeasures. But for now, at least, Ethan's self-destruct protocol remained the ultimate safeguard. Ethan still hasn't fully succumbed to the so-called curse of knowledge. He's nowhere near at the level of Tony Stark, able to snap his fingers and obtain any piece of cutting-edge tech. His mindset hasn't undergone that radical transformation yet. He's still obsessing over weapons research, aiming to create arms that pack high power, exceptional mobility, and deep penetration, all while remaining practical for urban deployment. After all, for superpowered operatives, the deadliest weapons are those that are both fast and capable of breaching the toughest defenses. Meanwhile, the debate over deploying a superpowered bodyguard has erupted into a fresh wave of online chatter. The question on everyone's lips is, if the US government wants top-tier security, why not simply hire Monarch? Detractors dismiss the idea as political posturing. Surely Ethan himself could fill the role. With Galvatron and Megatron now united, the discourse has reached a fever pitch, fueling a herd mentality among netizens. Many have come to believe that letting Monarch handle routine security tasks is not only sensible, but overdue. Of course, Washington isn't about to bow to this groundswell of public opinion. Come on, manipulating public opinion is just another tool for them. It doesn't mean they're actually swayed by it. The real power brokers in this country are still the big corporations and tycoons. If the government truly signed off on this deal, wouldn't they end up shelling out huge sums to Monarch every year? Security operations cover so many areas, and nobody's figured out exactly how to define them, especially given how complex the United States is. Every state has its own legal system, and then you've got the police, the National Guard, the military, plus the FBI. How do you draw the line for Monarch's law enforcement authority? What happens when their jurisdiction overlaps with other agencies? Do they get special privileges? There are countless questions and no clear answers. Some people even suggest it would be simpler to limit Monarch's mandate to superpowered terrorist threats. But if that were really so easy, S.H.I.E.L.D. wouldn't have butted heads with the military and the National Guard so many times over this exact issue. Especially now that this first incident had come to light, it was no small matter. The Monarch Company wielded real law enforcement authority. Its very name conferred privileges, an institutional umbrella that shielded it from challenge. What truly mattered to those at the top was whether their own interests were at risk. Public opinion is only one factor, Ethan remarked. Once it happens a few more times, people will start treating it as business as usual. He chuckled. Of course he understood why the U.S. government had ignored the public's outcry. Chapter 47. Journey to a New World. Having set the Emperor Company on a steady course, Ethan no longer needed to oversee its day-to-day affairs. Galvatron understood his master's methods well enough to run the Enterprise in Ethan's absence. With everything secure at home, Ethan turned his thoughts toward a grander adventure, a voyage into an entirely new world. He'd accomplished all he could for the moment in both the Marvel Universe and the Dragon Ball realm. Meditating beneath the sun might recharge his cells and boost his power gradually, but those gains paled beside the strides he made training with Broly and Cucumber. Still, even their intense sparring sessions hadn't solved the one problem that nagged at him. He had yet to find a way to merge his own genetic makeup with Broly's legendary bloodline. A new world, new possibilities, Ethan murmured to himself. Somewhere out there, he hoped, lay the key to unlocking that final barrier to his strength. He knew that in his own universe, the Super Dragon Balls held incredible power, but gathering them across countless galaxies was a mission far beyond his current reach. He squared his shoulders, energy crackling at his fingertips. "All right," he said quietly. "Time to go." With that, Ethan tapped into his supernatural abilities. In the blink of an eye, he vanished, off to seek the next chapter of his journey in an unknown world. Ethan stepped out of the portal and immediately sensed something different. This time, the gateway had been far wider than the ones that led him into the Dragon Ball or Marvel universes. And since he hadn't grown any stronger during the journey, it confirmed the hypothesis he'd been testing all along. The broader the passage, the more powerful the world on the other side. He found himself standing on a bustling city street that looked, at first glance, just like Earth. Storefronts and billboards were plastered with familiar Chinese characters. A rush of recognition ran through him. "Am I back in my own world?" he wondered aloud. Ethan pulled out his portable scanner and began sweeping the area for electronic signatures and network data. Within minutes, he'd mapped the city's entire information grid. But so far, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Shoving the device back into his pocket, he approached a pedestrian and asked, "Excuse me, where are we?" "Juxia City," the stranger replied without turning around. At the sound of that name, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He'd heard of this place before, several times in fact. It figured prominently in 3 alternate histories. 1. The Super Seminary timeline, where gifted children are trained in mystic arts and science beyond imagination. 2. The Hero Company universe, dominated by a corporate-run league of superhumans. 3. A more obscure version that opened with a gigantic chrysanthemum-shaped energy field appearing in the sky. He hadn't expected to land in the Super Seminary world. On paper, this timeline boasted dazzling technological marvels, hover trains, energy barriers, devices that could manipulate gravity. But in practice, much of what looked like cutting-edge science functioned more like folklore, arcane, folk science rituals that somehow worked better than any conventional technology back home. Ethan suspected the reason lay in this world's different cosmic constants, parameters that allowed folk magic and science to achieve feats that would be impossible here on Earth. With that realization, Ethan squared his shoulders. He'd need to learn more about Juxia City, and fast. In a universe where mystics, corporate super soldiers, and spontaneous energy phenomena were the norm, even a seasoned traveler like him couldn't afford to waste a second. He melted into the crowd, eager to discover what challenges and opportunities awaited in the Super Seminary world. Ethan stared into the distance, mulling over the possibilities. The Super Seminary world, could their gene augmentation technology help me and Broly unlock our full potential? The pinnacle of that world's science was the big clock, a celestial-level supercomputer so advanced that even the angel civilization's greatest archives paled in comparison. If anyone could refashion his genome, and Broly's, this machine could. But there was a problem. Ethan had no way to travel there. He lacked both the crossing coordinates and the teleportation runes required to reach that realm. Even if he dared challenge the god of death, Carl, and wrest the big clock away to the Marvel universe for Galvatron's study, he simply didn't have the means. Ethan tapped his fingertips against his thigh. His mind was a marvel, an organic counterpart to the Super Seminary's greatest computers, complete with photographic recall. Yet his academic training didn't cover interdimensional navigation or divine artifact retrieval. No matter how sharp his intellect, he needed the right knowledge and the right pathway before he could hope to seize that ultimate prize. Ethan paused, considering the angels. If he could befriend a wealthy angelic woman, he might reverse-engineer her super gene technology and unlock priceless knowledge. But that was out of the question for now. Holy Kesha still stood guard. The angels remained untouched by any crisis, and approaching them would draw unwanted attention. He needed to erase every trace of his connection to the dark realm. Fortunately, he'd only just manifested in the Super Seminary world, so none of his dark plane data should have followed him here. Ethan reminded himself how the dark matter plane worked. It housed a discrete medium that recorded every thought and action. Advanced civilizations knew how to extract or delete that data, and even repurpose the storage space to hide weapons, secret archives, or engines. The legendary Holy Treasury of Knowledge, the Supergene engine, both were stashed somewhere in those shadows. The sub-biological dark plane operated on the same principle, only buried deeper in the void's darkness. Angels often tapped these hidden records to reconstruct a person's or world's history, though for speed's sake, they usually breached live databases instead. Ethan just had to make sure none of his own dark plane fingerprints remained when he forged ahead. Furthermore, the dark plane also serves as a secure storage realm. For example, Holy Kesh's knowledge vault resides there. Anyone with dark plane access can carve out private, encrypted pockets, safe from prying eyes, and ideal for stashing valuable data. In Super God technology, the dark plane underlies more than just storage. Dark communication, built on its unique structure, outclasses conventional systems, laser, quantum, or neutrino, in both security and reliability. Super soldiers are humans enhanced with super god genes, granting them combat prowess and supernatural abilities far beyond normal limits. As Morgana once explained, they're called super soldiers because they're engineered for near indestructibility. Some attain steel-like bodies, others divine forms like Lena's, and a few become downright invincible, like Sun Wukong. At the highest levels of super god civilization, such as within the Academy, dark matter computers are standard. These bioengineered processors are integrated directly into a soldier's genome, forming what we call divine power, the genetic system that unlocks their extraordinary gifts. At the pinnacle of technological achievement stands the celestial-level computer, the most powerful machine in the known universe. Surprisingly, no deity has yet managed to implant one of these computers directly into their own genome to create a personal gene system. Instead, every god-level civilization and advanced spacefaring empire relies on a far more readily available resource, dark energy. Without it, organic super soldiers would be hopelessly outmatched by mech armies. Dark energy acts as a kind of biological cheat code, leveling the playing field against pure mechanical force. Dark energy's applications are astonishingly diverse. For starters, it can store vast reservoirs of information. If an enemy protects their secrets as dark data, a dark energy analyzer can tap into those reserves, siphoning away intelligence to reveal the opponent's true capabilities. On the battlefield, dark energy unleashes elemental assaults, conflagrations of flame, crackling electrical discharges, and, at its highest intensities, corrosive mists that dissolve matter or all-consuming shadows that swallow everything in their path. Mastery of dark energy isn't just an advantage, it's the linchpin of cosmic power and interstellar travel alike. Chapter 48. The Importance of the Dark Plane. Ethan slipped into a seat at the far end of the briefing room, the lights dimmed to a cold blue glow. Around him, half a dozen officers and researchers watched Director Sa as he prepared to speak. On the transparent hollow screen behind him floated the words, "The Dark Plane, Key to Superhuman Evolution." Director Sa cleared his throat. When most people hear gods, they think of religious figures, Jesus, Allah, Buddha. To strict atheists, those are metaphysical comforts invented by humans to soften life's cruelties. We've always dismissed them as myths, but in this new super god universe, God takes on a very different meaning. He tapped the console at his side, and an image of a colossal, armor-clad figure materialized. Here, gods aren't divine spirits. They're the inevitable product of our technological evolution, superhuman beings born from genetic and cybernetic breakthroughs. You can think of them as supergenes. Life forms born with advanced built-in capabilities, honed by the cutting-edge science of their era. Director Essa advanced to the next slide, which diagrammed energy flows around a stylized galaxy. These supergenes can manipulate fundamental forces, dark energy chief among them. They're not channeling some mystical power. They're tapping into physical laws we're only beginning to understand. That's why our science fiction fantasies ring so true. We've turned them into science fact. Ethan leaned forward. So when Rena ignites a star drive, she's using genetic tech to harness stellar energy. But what about Tauti? I've heard she doesn't have that gene. A faint smile crossed Director Sa's lips. Correct. Rena's genome was engineered with a specialized receptor for proton fusion cascades. That's what powers her star drive ability. Tauti, by contrast, lacks that receptor. She specializes in kinetic force fields. Different supergenes, different powers. He clicked again. A wireframe model of powered armor appeared. And our armors are no slouches either. Each suit carries an onboard quantum computing cloud. It handles the complex calculations required for weapon targeting, shield modulation, even battlefield strategy. The wearer only needs to think. The armor does the math. The holoscreen transitioned to a dark lab, empty expanse, black as ink. This, Director Sa said, voice low, is the dark plane, a realm where energy curves differently, where dark energy surges in ripples you can surf or weaponize. It's unpredictable, dangerous, and above all, essential. No supergene can reach its full potential without mastering the dark plane. He let the words hang for a moment. Then he fixed his gaze on Ethan. That's why you're here, Ethan. Theoretical knowledge only takes you so far. Soon, you and your teammates will train in the dark plane itself. You'll learn to channel dark energy safely, to bend its flows rather than be broken by them. Ethan swallowed. The chamber felt colder now, as if the shadows themselves leaned in to listen. He straightened his spine. Understood, Director. Director Sa nodded once. Good. Remember, the future of superhuman evolution depends on our grasp of the dark plane. Master it, and we secure our next leap forward. The hollow screen faded. The briefing room's lights brightened. Outside, the base's night shift continued its silent vigil, unaware that at this very moment, another chapter in superhuman history was about to begin. Ethan stared at the display as schematics of the new armor's computing cloud scrolled by. These advanced systems boasted phenomenal processing speeds, but even they couldn't match the onboard networks of frontline warships like Skyblade 7 or Demon. One at the very top of the hierarchy sat the Great Clock in the Styx galaxy, the most powerful computing cloud in known space. A close second was the Vault of Sacred Knowledge on Kesha, whose archives were said to contain truths older than many stars. As he studied the data, Ethan reminded himself there's really no substantive difference between what Io civilizations call super soldiers and divine bodies. The term divine body fits better for those elite warriors at the apex of human or post-human evolution. Each tier emphasizes a different set of genetic modifications, from enhanced reflexes to near-immortal tissue regeneration. But no enhancement is invulnerable. Exposed to weapons powered by void engines or the feared god-killing void weapon engineered to target and dismantle supergene structures, these upgrades can degrade. Once a supergene engine is destroyed, consumed, or molecularly unraveled, even the toughest champions who once shrugged off Liang-class assault weapons can be pierced, crippled, or worse. Ethan's briefing notes made clear that while many third-generation super soldiers come standard with an invincible body configuration, not every soldier of that generation possesses it. This near-legendary toughness is made possible by a sub-biological engine, an internal mechanism designed to reinforce cellular integrity under fire. Yet true invincibility, the kind that can never be compromised or downgraded, remains more myth than reality. Ethan sat in the dim glow of the lab's holo display, listening as Ji Xiaolun adjusted the parameters on the readout. A cascade of light particles danced across the glass console, quantifying energies that most people couldn't even imagine. Invincibility isn't absolute, Ge Xiaolun said, her voice steady. It all depends on how hard you're hit. No one, no matter how sacred their body, can survive everything. A Kesha with a perfected sacred body enhancement, even they would be torn to atoms in the blast of a supernova. Ethan leaned forward. But what about the legends, the divine bodies, the so-called invincible warriors? Aren't they effectively immortal? Not immortal, Ge Xiaolun corrected. They're just engineered better. In the Xiong 1 expedition, the Howl King of Tauti explained it clearly. An invincible body is really just a system that taps into infinite photonic energy. You reshape that raw light through a supergene network linked to the dark plane. That's Shen He technology. The divine body goes one step further. It incorporates adaptive antibodies, full radiation immunity, and an energy-based metabolism that sidesteps normal biological decay. Ethan pictured a soldier whose cells glowed from within, bacteria and radiation simply rebounding off him. So gods and super soldiers are really just biology plus hardware plus computation? Exactly, Jay Shaolin said, tapping a few commands. Super genes for raw power, super weapons for offense, and supercomputing cores to manage it all in real time. But there's a bigger picture here. She brought up a schematic of a vast network. Imagine the super god universe as a cosmic mainframe. The physical worlds we see are just one layer, data rendered into life. The dark plane is the framework through which that data flows. And the void and anti-void, they're still beta-stage programs with the potential to rewrite the system's core code. They can create or erase entire realms, but they're flawed, unstable. That's why true omnipotence remains out of reach. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the implications sink in. The line between flesh and machine, life and code, was more fragile and more intertwined than he had ever realized. Outside the lab, the stars whispered their own secrets, and Ethan knew that understanding this cosmic computer would be the key to everything that came next. Ethan and the angelic Voidwalkers can only tinker with the existing data streams and execution paths of the universe's central computer. They have no authority to generate new code or forge entirely new channels. The moment they drift off the prescribed course, the computer's self-correcting routines snap them right back into place, so any changes they make can only last for a brief window. At first, Ethan's counter-void protocol simply shut down every data channel it touched. Biological signals, void currents, even dark energy flows were all forced offline. In binary T, ERMS, he turned everything to zero. With Jixin's help, though, he went a step further. They developed a comprehensive void program, whispered of in the corridors of power as Xiongxin, that grafted itself onto the universe computer's core. Thanks to Xiongxin, Ethan could now spin up fresh data pipeline execution paths at will, so that even the computer's strongest shutdown commands couldn't close him out. Their weapons work under the same familiar principle. The human body is treated as a sort of organic terminal, and every blade, firearm, or piece of armor exists only as compressed data stowed in the background. When Ethan needs his sword or Jixin calls up her plasma rifle, the computer simply decompresses and reassembles the files in real time, delivering the finished weapon into their hands. And, as Jixin points out, what we see as the real world is only the surface layer. Deeper down, through the eye of insight, there lies a hidden realm woven entirely from dark matter. Imagine the universe as a vast computer image. Once you unlock it, you discover it's really just a colossal set of codes, an intricate arrangement of rules that organizes the dark matter beneath all reality. In the same way that a real-world car is simply matter, and here dark matter, shaped and ordered to serve a purpose, every object and every law of physics in this cosmos is coded. Now consider what it means to be a fully equipped third-generation god. Such an individual roams freely between galaxies with an almost eternal lifespan. Their dark plane computers outstrip the digital might of most spacefaring civilizations. Their weapons unleash power on the scale of star destroyers. Their personal armor, designed to evade all known detection and to shrug off bombardments from even the most advanced warships, makes them all but invincible by conventional means. But a fourth-generation god stands on an even higher plateau. They command celestial computers whose processing cores carry the accumulated wisdom of thousands of civilizations over millennia. Their arsenals host technologies that conventional physics cannot contain. Any attempt to destroy them would be futile. The only force in the universe capable of truly challenging such a being is a supermassive black hole. What makes the supergod hierarchy genuinely terrifying isn't just raw power, it's control over civilization itself. Gods monopolize the collective knowledge and resources of countless worlds. They possess unmatched military strength and survival capabilities. In the aftermath of a cataclysm, a single qualified god can rebuild an entire civilization in record time, because in their hands lie the blueprints of every scientific breakthrough, every cultural achievement, and every secret that once defined civilization. Chapter 4. The Dual Failsafe of Civilization. Ethan stood before the tiered holoprojector, eyes fixed on the swirling models of broken worlds and resurrected gods. In most science fiction tales, war is simple. You obliterate a planet, crush its armies, and the civilization vanishes forever. But in the super god system, annihilation is never that straightforward. Here, he explained, sweeping one hand across the floating schematics, conventional attacks target physical infrastructure, cities, fleets, planetary cores. But our gods guard both the body and the soul of a civilization. They've put in place a dual-layer insurance policy. You must destroy a civilization's physical form and its patron deity almost simultaneously. Only then can you truly claim victory. He tapped the hollow diagram of Shenhe. The planet's cities had been reduced to dust, its people gone in an instant, yet the great chronoclock remained. The main world shell collapsed, yes, Ethan said, voice tight with awe, but that clock still ticks. As long as it survives, Shenhe can rebirth itself in hyperspace whenever conditions permit it. Their civilization isn't dead, it's merely dormant. A new model appeared, the Angel Collective. Its supreme deity, Kaisha, lay inert, sealed away by a catastrophic urge. Kaisha might be offline, he continued, but the archive, their collective repository of knowledge, endures. Their flagship bastions still drift in orbit. The moment they gather enough energy, they'll forge a new deity. Instantly. They've done it before. Ethan turned off the projector. He faced the gathered crew, their faces pale in the dim light. Don't underestimate these resurrections, he warned. Yes, the later stages of a super god's power curve can seem weakened. Plots unravel, combat might declines, but that's the adaptability of this system. It is astonishingly resilient, he paused. Imagine placing a super god civilization into the three-body universe, or thrusting it through a universe restart event. Conventional weapons can't finish the job, unless you pin down both the corporeal and the divine, severing the link in the narrow window between them. These civilizations will always find a way back. Silence filled the chamber. Ethan's final words hung in the air like a challenge. Our strategy must evolve. To conquer a super god civilization, we must learn to strike twice, swiftly and without mercy. Only then can we claim the ultimate victory. Chapter 49. Testing the Waters. Ethan's strategy for hiding his dark plane connection is deceptively straightforward. First, he taps into the Kryptonian omnidirectional biofield, a living energy shield capable of masking not only his physical form, but any trace of extra-dimensional influence. Yet even that feels incomplete. Having never interfaced with the dark plane, he knows next to nothing about its rules. So he layers on a second defense, a finely woven magical blockade designed to confound any probing Shadow Realm sensors. But another question gnaws at him. How will this universe's yellow sun affect him? Over countless worlds, he's seen supermen twisted by alien starlight, some crystallizing into pure energy, others awakening strange sorceries. Now, exposed to a new solar spectrum on top of a cross-universe journey, he's venturing deeper into the unknown. What if this sunlight amplifies his power beyond control? What if it twists him into something unrecognizable? He silences doubt with logic. Running rapid diagnostic simulations, his supercomputer cross-references Earth's hidden lore with Titanarian energy signatures. A name emerges from the archives, Sumali, the primordial slayer god who has haunted human myths since antiquity. For Ethan, confronting Sumali isn't just a chance to test his defenses. It's a vital experiment in understanding how this sun will mold his abilities. Yes, the planet's own technology lags light years behind what he's used to back on Titanar, but overcoming that gap, from 0 to 1, is itself a monumental breakthrough. As dawn's golden rays spill across the landscape, Ethan activates his biofield and seals his magical ward. Every calculation, every precaution, all points to a single moment of truth. One flash of yellow sunlight on his skin, one battle with an ancient god, and he'll finally know the limits of his new powers, or discover strengths he never imagined. What I need is just the basics in this field, Ethan mused, then vanished in a blur of motion as he rocketed towards Sumali's last known location. Kryptonians are unrivaled when it comes to gathering data, yet most never leverage their super intellects to properly sift through the torrent of information from heat vision, X-ray sight, and amplified hearing. Instead, they rely on their mental processors to automatically discard anything deemed irrelevant. Over countless years, this shortcut left Ethan's superbrain with precisely one discipline: combat, when to strike, how to defend, and solving every problem with raw power. But Ethan had been inspired by Earth's greatest minds, Bulma, her father, even Dr. Gero, and he knew that true intelligence demanded constant exercise of reasoning and calculation. It wasn't glamorous work, but with centuries stretching before him, he welcomed the challenge of sharpening his mind. Today, he would reap the reward of those painstaking efforts. While Galvatron was likely still combing the cosmos for clues, Ethan had already tracked down the elusive Sumali. Unlike Huaye, who confined his pleasures to celestial beings, Sumali courted women from Earth, even erecting entire empires to sate his whims. Within moments, Ethan materialized on the marble terrace of Sumali's hidden sanctuary. Drawing upon his enhanced vision, he watched the decadent halls below, then stepped forward and spoke, voice calm but commanding. "Mr. Sumali, your hospitality is requested." Sumali didn't even open his eyes when a sultry voice purred. "Sumali, you were amazing last night." He stretched out on the velvet sheets as 5 young models stirred around him. One of them batted her eyelashes. "You're rich, generous, and handsome. Why not make this more permanent?" Sumali offered a lazy smile, slipped each girl a thick envelope of cash, and rose to his feet. "Thanks for coming by. That'll do for now." They squealed in delight and slipped out. With his family fortune, Sumali had no shortage of admirers and no reason to get attached. A low voice behind him cut through the room. "You performed well." Heart hammering, Sumali spun around and felt a massive hand clamp around his throat. In the same instant, he was slammed against the wall. Thud! The reinforced biotech force field in the concrete held firm like iron. Pain exploded through Sumali's chest as his ribs jarred and an agonized groan caught in his throat. The grip tightened. Sumali's vision swam with heat and fear. This was no ordinary assailant. Ethan studied him coolly. A single squeeze from a super warrior like him, and Sumali, a pampered second-generation tycoon, was on the brink of serious injury. Pathetic. Compared to legends such as the thick-skinned Galaxy Force or the fabled Nuo Xing war god, Sumali's strength barely registered. Finally, Ethan released him. Sumali slid to the floor, coughing and clutching his side, eyes blazing with fury. "You'll pay for this," he snarled. Ethan merely shrugged and disappeared into the shadowed corridor, leaving Sumali to nurse both his bruises and his wounded pride. Ethan's biogenic energy field shimmered to life around him just in time. A silver dagger, rippling with wormhole tech distortion, shot toward him and embedded itself in the hardened energy shield he'd woven around his forearm. Sumali blinked, unbelieving. Who are you?" she whispered, struggling to find her voice. Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm a Kryptonian. I came for the angels, advanced genetics and technology. If you'd hand it over." He let the sentence hang. She watched in stunned silence as Ethan pulled the short blade free from his palm. The Ansu silver dagger, the very weapon that, under Hishi's command, had sliced through 1,000 warrior angels like they were chaff, had been stopped cold by his outstretched hand. How could you catch it?" Sumali finally managed, disbelief coloring her tone. "No mortal, or immortal, has the reflexes or strength for that." Ethan flexed his wrist, watching the rippled metal dance between his fingers. "I augmented my biogenic field with chi. It's not just a shield, it's a conduit for concentrated force." Sumali's eyes narrowed as she reassessed him. Here stood a Kryptonian who could master both alien energy and ancient mystic techniques. The balance of power had just shifted dramatically, and she knew, in that heartbeat, that neither the angel's secrets nor the Ansu blade would fall into her hands without a fight. Ethan turned the Ansu silver dagger over in his hand, surprised by its wicked gleam. The blade's gaudy contours spoke more of ceremonial display than battlefield utility. If Ansu silver weren't inherently lethal, this ornate design would be purely ornamental. He frowned in sudden fascination. So this is its molecular structure. An unexpected windfall like this dagger had its perks. If he could fuse Ansu silver with dark silver and thunderbolt steel, perhaps he could forge an alloy to rival the fabled adamantium. For now, though, the dagger itself held no value to him beyond its materials. He slipped it free and eyed Sumali. Without warning, Ethan pressed the tip into her shoulder. Sumali, a seasoned warrior who hadn't tasted real pain in years, gasped, her composure crackling like a spent fire. Ethan's touch was deceptively light. The silver blade parted flesh as easily as a hot knife through butter, A clean sweep, and her arm lay severed at the elbow. Sumali bit back her scream, her eyes wide with shock. Ethan held the dripping hilt aloft and leaned forward, his voice low and calm. "Tell me, can your mind keep secrets?" She could not speak. He had only to begin. Ethan's magic, dark, relentless, flowed into her consciousness. Sumali, whose expertise lay in blades and battle, had never before encountered such invasive sorcery. As her world narrowed to a swirl of pain and whispers, Ethan planted the questions he needed answers to, questions no iron or steel could pry loose. Ethan surveyed the fallen angel before him. Divine beings might resist such power, let alone someone like Sumali, whose civilization trailed millennia behind in technology, but he felt no sympathy. He claimed what he needed, without a second thought. If only she'd been a Tianja official, he murmured, recalling how the angels had purged the true scholars of that realm. With abilities like hers, exile would have been impossible. Even her bond with Heishi wouldn't have saved her. In truth, the spoils he'd gained were meager. Sumali had been bred for battle, not research. Even Tianza's legendary super gene engines hadn't required such arcane theory. At best, she possessed fragments of advanced concepts, ideas that, untethered from practical application, were nearly worthless. Ethan's patience snapped. "Concepts are meaningless unless you can use them," he said. Raising his hand, he wove a transformation spell. "Transmute!" Sumali's form wavered. Flesh and bone gave way to something cold and unyielding, a single dark silver ingot. All trace of her previous shape vanished. In its place lay a polished bar of metal, still humming with latent power, but entirely devoid of life. Chapter 50. Necessary Things. "When the time comes to deal with the angels," Ethan said with a half-smile, "I'll trade you to Heishi." He let his gaze linger on the massive ingot of dark silver spread out before him. With this much in hand, securing angelic technology ought to be straightforward. Across the galaxy, Holy Kesha had been hoarding every scrap of dark silver in her vault of sacred knowledge. Yet Ethan knew that no matter how plentiful the metal, the angels would never part with their most advanced secrets without exacting a high price. Dark silver was common on Fraser's world, but its true value hinged on who held it and how they negotiated. Ethan could have simply seized the silver by force. His reputation alone kept both mortal and immortal powers in check. But he preferred diplomacy over war. The angels, unlike the predatory Liang or demonic civilizations, were open to barter. Holy Kesha herself would never stoop to outright theft. Her sacred duty was to uphold justice and cosmic order. The others, with fewer scruples, would have grabbed the silver at the first opportunity. He tapped a small control module on the table, watching its pale glow. "To reach the angels," he mused, "I need Angel Yan to come to the International Group headquarters." That meeting would be his opening. Satisfied with his plan, Ethan plotted his course for the Angel Nebula. On planet Erling, he would adopt a new role, guardian of Angel Yan and architect of his own future negotiations. Years after Ethan, the former Tianji king, had abdicated, he continued his private experiments in his secluded study. One morning, his orbital data network, an extension of the celestial computer, sent up an urgent alert. The dark energy signature he'd been tracking around Sumali had simply vanished. Ethan frowned. He couldn't imagine Sumali daring to slip off Earth unnoticed. After all, Ethan himself had sworn that the moment the fugitive left the planet, he'd dispatch a squad of third-generation high-level angel guards to bring him down. At his current power level, any one of those guards would overwhelm Sumali in moments. He tapped a command to pull up the last recorded dark plane feed. The screens filled with distorted, unsettling shapes from that shadow realm, images Ethan usually ignored. But tonight, something caught his eye. Sumali appeared on screen, under attack by an unseen force, writhing as in mortal danger. "What on earth is this?" Ethan muttered. He instructed the celestial computer to analyze the feed, but even with its vast orbital processors, the data remained garbled. Intrigued, he funneled every spare cycle into decrypting the dark plane transmission. Nowhere in the known universe could anyone routinely read that realm's raw information, but if anyone could, it would be Ethan. For the first time since his abdication, a spark of the old king's curiosity flared to life. Not even the Grand Patriarch could unravel it, and not even Karl, the death god, dared to try. Only the legendary Grand Chronometer holds that power, and Carl refused to loan it to a mere Somali. Once the runes are decrypted, the bearer could wield them to immolate him. Do you truly wish to meddle in the affairs of the Angelic Dominion and the Tianza Empire? What is your decision? Silence followed, broken only by the cold, mechanical voice of the spaceborne system. Allocating 10% of total computational resources, initializing read sequence. Inside Ethan's body, the supergene engine roared to life and linked with his onboard space system. Above them, a remote computational cluster in the dark plane threw its weight into the effort. Together, they dedicated a staggering 10% of the universe's processing power. Nearby energy stars quivered as fluctuations rippled through them, and dormant solar flares ignited with new ferocity. Yet even this prodigious force could not crack the code. Read failed, retrying. Resynchronizing dark plane archives, reading, failure. Retrying, failure. Ethan halted the operation. His other programs were still running, and there was no way to draw more power. 10% of the realm's combined computation wasted on a reading that stubbornly refused to yield a single clue. What on earth had he stumbled into? Ethan paused in front of the holoscreen, eyes narrowing at the latest readings. Was there really a being that powerful hiding somewhere in the known universe? Or could it be Carl, the dreaded god of death? If Ethan, knew the truth, he'd waste no time sending his forces to Blue Star. Better to keep him in the dark. Across the lab, Hexie's scientific curiosity flared to life. She was used to pushing the envelope, but this was unprecedented. The moment Ethan found out, he'd send operatives at once. No, she needed a cleaner approach. If anything went wrong, only a clone would be lost, and all the better to harvest its data. Prepare one of my clones for immediate deployment, she ordered. It won't take long for him to get to Blue Star. Moments later, the clone shimmered into existence, its features identical to Hexie's own. He advanced to the slipstream gate, and within seconds vanished, bound for the region around Somali. Hexie watched the feed anxiously. Dark plane information was never perfectly sealed. There were always gaps, omissions in the security protocols. Even a tiny breach could reveal the answers they needed. Meanwhile, Ethan wandered the corridors of the Juxia City precinct. He still couldn't be sure which incarnation of the Super Seminary or which version of the heroic company he joined. Every timeline shift left him with different memories, different loyalties. He steeled himself and knocked on the door of Captain Keelan's office. She had answers, and Ethan intended to get them. Ethan paused at the door of Precinct 17, a stack of milk teacups cradled in his arms, and let himself smile. He had met another officer Keelan before, the one who'd cock her pistol and joke about shooting people at the drop of a hat. But this Keelan was completely different. She was his favorite. Level-headed, fiercely responsible, with none of the drama that surrounded Jie Xiaolun. Even with his little super-gene advantage, Ethan still worked himself to the bone, and he respected her all the more for doing the same. He remembered how Delana had endlessly tweaked Keelan's behavior algorithms, versions upon versions, and yet none of them felt as solid, as graceful as this original. Angel Yang could entertain wild ideas and fantastic redesigns, but in the end, the real Keelan was irreplaceable. Stepping into the bullpen, Ethan called out, "Officer Keelan, your faithful Ethan has returned, and I've brought reinforcements." He held up the topmost cup. Keelan looked up from her paperwork, arching an eyebrow. "Spare me the theatrics, Ethan. You know these are for the squad room, right?" Sure, but you get first pick." He set the drinks down in a neat row and offered one to her. She reached out, reluctant to show she cared. "Don't get used to it. You're not exactly a decorated hero. No badges, no commendations." Ethan flashed a grin. "True, but I'm an expert in milk tea logistics." Across the room, a fellow officer snorted. "You two are awful together." Keelan cleared her throat and pretended to focus on her report. Ethan leaned against her desk, sipping his tea. Every day he came back, and every day she tried to act indifferent, yet somehow she never quite managed it. Keelan was at the perfect age for matchmaking, so her family arranged a blind date with Ethan. From the moment she met him, she was struck by his presence, tall and handsome, with a strong, confident bearing that felt reassuringly masculine. According to her parents' inquiries, Ethan ran a thriving beverage business with 5 franchise locations, hardly a modest enterprise. Many in their social circle assumed his family background would be considered an upgrade for Cheelin, though neither she nor her father saw it that way. Ethan, for his part, was unbothered by such judgments. Having already navigated adventures in the Marvel and Dragon Ball worlds, he viewed the Super Seminary realm as another frontier, and Cheelin, a policewoman there, as a valuable ally, and perhaps more. That afternoon, Ethan appeared at Cheelin's office just after 3 o'clock. He leaned casually against the doorway and offered a warm smile. "Cheelin, it's a good time for a break. Why don't you join me for some tea?" Cheelin's cheeks flushed. She glanced down at her desk piled with reports. "Ethan, you really don't have to come by so often," she said, her voice catching slightly. He chuckled softly, stepping inside and setting a thermos on her desk. "I don't mind," he replied. His easy confidence and genuine interest made it hard for her to refuse. Though she hadn't yet decided where her feelings lay, Ethan's steadfast enthusiasm made her heart flutter, and for the first time, Cheelin wondered if this blind date might lead somewhere unexpected. "I noticed everyone slipped in during their break so as not to disrupt official business," Ethan said with a warm smile. "Are you free this evening? How about dinner together?" Chapter 51, Cheelin Bond. The precinct was winding down when Ethan caught up to Detective Cheelin at her desk. He leaned forward, voice low and steady. "Cheelin, would you join me for dinner tonight?" Cheelin paused, pen hovering above her report. She'd been looking forward to a quiet evening, but something in Ethan's earnest gaze made her sigh instead of refuse. "All right," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. 6 o'clock at the Blue Harbor." Ethan's face brightened like a sunrise. "Perfect. I'll see you there." He turned on his heel and slipped out before she could reconsider or tease him further. Behind them, Detective Chen and Officer Ma exchanged triumphant looks. Chen tapped Ma's shoulder and nodded at Cheelin's desk. "Looks like our department's favorite single lady just got a date." Ma chuckled. "Poor Cheelin, snatched up at last. Who can blame her, though?" Across the room, a few officers shook their heads, half amused, half mournful at the thought of their unofficial mascot leaving the single life behind. Cheelin shot them a withering glance, gathered her things, and stomped off. Left in the sudden silence, Ethan allowed himself a quiet chuckle. Social niceties weren't his strong suit. Before Angel Yan's arrival to guide his covert mission, polite dinner invitations were about the only small pleasure he could manage here. Revealing his true origins, a Kryptonian scholar-in-waiting at the legendary Super Seminary, wouldn't do him any favors. The seminary's vaults of genetic, god-making technology were legendary, but in the grand tapestry of the universe, they still trailed behind countless more advanced civilizations. Asking for instant enrollment and access to their deepest secrets? Utter fantasy. He'd be better off leaning on Angel Yan's influence, making a straightforward proposal through the channels the seminary respected. As dusk settled, Cheelin locked up her drawer, changed from her uniform into a pair of dark jeans and a leather jacket, and headed out, unaware that her dinner date was as much a turning point for Ethan's secret ambitions as it was the start of something unexpected. Ethan pulled up in front of the Xia City police station and called out, "Cheelin." Moments later, she climbed into the passenger seat, still in plain clothes. Ethan glanced at her and said with a smile, "Just so you know, we're not going anywhere fancy tonight." She laughed softly. "I figured as much. Wouldn't want anyone thinking I bribed you." He shook his head, chuckling. "That's not it. It's just, I've never eaten at a high-end place before. I'd feel totally out of my depth." Cheelin leaned back, her grin widening. With a family like hers, her father, Chi Lingfeng, was chief of police for Juxia City, and with her own rank as a first-class inspector, 2 bars and 3 stars, achieved at just 26 years old, she could walk into any exclusive club or member-only restaurant without a second thought. After all, reaching that deputy bureau level normally took 24 years of service. Still, she enjoyed Ethan's down-to-earth company far more than any chandelier-lit dining room. "Don't worry," she said. "Tonight, a simple place sounds perfect." Ethan pulled up in front of a modest, mid-sized restaurant, far from the ostentatious place Cheelin had always scorned. She'd insisted that somewhere like the Grand Pavilion felt contrived, more about spectacle than flavor, and outrageously expensive for a simple meal. So tonight, he'd booked them a private booth here. Qilin hadn't objected. Her agreement meant she trusted him enough to dine together, but she couldn't shake the urge to stay alert. They slid into the booth. After a moment of silence, Ethan closed his menu and fixed her with a half-smile. "Let's get one thing straight. I'll only pay for what I order tonight." Qilin tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sounds good. Your wallet, your rules." He chuckled softly. "Fair enough, but try not to stare so hard." Qilin's shoulders tensed. Under his steady gaze, she felt her composure wobble. "There's only the two of us here. What else am I supposed to look at?" His expression softened. "Just so we're clear, I haven't asked you out. We're friends, Qilin. That's all." She gave a short laugh, masking the flutter in her chest. "Understood. Friends, got it." Ethan's eyes grew serious. "Promise me you won't run off to the station again. It only makes things complicated. If you need help, come to me after work." Qilin met his concern with a quiet nod. The waiter arrived to take their order, and as warm lamplight settled over the table, the tension between them eased. Two friends, a private booth, and an evening ahead. Maybe, she thought, that was enough to start with. "I hope we can start as friends," Qilin said earnestly as they sat across from each other at the small table. "There's so little time, and I don't really know you yet, Ethan." Ethan offered a reassuring smile. "I understand. Come find me after my shift." Qilin studied him thoughtfully. He didn't argue or push for more. She'd undergone rigorous training to form her convictions. She was principled, sensible, and knew exactly what she wanted. A girl like her was rare. They finished their dinner in companionable silence. When Ethan stood, Qilin half expected him to invite her to a movie or some late-night shopping trip. Instead, he simply slipped on his jacket and said, "You must be exhausted after today. Let me walk you home." The crisp evening air followed them down the quiet street. Reaching her doorstep, Ethan paused. "Get some rest, okay?" Qilin cocked an eyebrow. "Isn't that a bit obvious?" He chuckled softly. "Not at all. Police work wears you down. I know how important a good night's sleep is." She felt a warm flutter at his thoughtfulness. Blushing, she managed a small smile. "You've been wonderful tonight, Ethan. Thank you." With a final nod, he watched her step inside. As the door closed, Qilin leaned against it, already looking forward to tomorrow. Qilin couldn't deny how much closer she felt to Ethan after their conversation. It was rare to meet someone who not only understood her passion for policing, but genuinely cared about it. Ever since she was little, her father's stories had inspired her to follow in his footsteps, and now, more than anything, she wanted to serve her country. She knew plenty of people looked down on the police these days, but in her eyes, those criticisms were nothing more than misunderstandings, opinions made by people who'd never walked in an officer's shoes. Shiwan's recent remarks, for instance, had annoyed her. She'd been eager to hear Ethan's take on the profession. Now she had her answer, and it only made her respect him and like him more. "Goodbye," she said, offering him a warm smile. "Goodbye," Ethan replied with a nod, his calm confidence putting her at ease. Qilin turned for home, her heart still fluttering. When she stepped through the front door, both her parents were waiting with knowing grins. "That's Ethan, right?" her mother asked softly. "Bringing you home. What did you think?" Her father chimed in, teasing. "So, when are you taking him out for dinner?" Qilin's cheeks burned. "What are you talking about? We're just friends." "Oh, just friends," her mother echoed, eyebrow raised. "In that case, it'll happen soon enough." Her father ruffled her hair. "Don't rush into things, Qi. Enjoy getting to know him first." Qilin forced a laugh, though inside she was giddy. Whatever the future held, she knew her feelings for Ethan were only just beginning to bloom. First, find out what kind of person he really is, Qilingfeng advised his daughter, his voice steady and calm. He'd arranged this blind date reluctantly, but there was no need for dramatics, no sneaky tactics, no last-minute objections. "I know, Dad," Qilin said, "but Ethan doesn't seem to look down on us just because we're police officers." Qilingfeng raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what makes you say that?" Qilin hesitated a moment. "Well, after dinner, he actually told me to get some rest and said he'd drive me home." Her father looked taken aback. He'd picture, at the usual scenario, dinner, maybe a movie or some shopping, only to walk away with the perfunctory, "Thanks for coming out." Instead, Ethan's concern for her well-being had caught both of them off guard. "He told you to rest and go home?" Qilingfeng repeated, incredulous. Cheelin nodded. She glanced at her father, noting that he still hadn't spotted how tired she was, and apparently, neither had Ethan. Yet there was something reassuring about his thoughtfulness toward her job and her health. Yeah, I guess he's pretty considerate. Qi Lingfeng studied her face for any trace of reluctance or disappointment, but found none. If his daughter truly had no interest in this date, she wouldn't have agreed to dinner in the first place. With a nod, he conceded softly, maybe he is all right after all. As a father, all Ethan could do was help his daughter keep a close watch on him. Chapter 52. Unexpected Changes. Ethan's vigilant gaze swept across every corner of Juxia City as he pored over Sumali's ancient blueprints, desperate to transform theory into reality. But Sumali's mistake, stamped by tens of thousands of years of lost progress, left him with fragments of a super gene engine he simply couldn't reconstruct. It felt like waking a Stone Age tribesman who'd glimpsed a starship and expecting him to explain nuclear fusion. Still, Ethan wasn't lonely. Cheelin, his girlfriend, brought light to every tedious moment. Unbeknownst to the Super Seminary, she carried a faint, almost undetectable super gene from the Shenhe star network of the Shenhe civilization. Their sensors were trained on other targets. They had no idea how many such genes the network might have scattered across the galaxy, and Cheelin's signature slipped right through their net. Between them, a deep bond formed in no time. Ethan's enhanced brain processed data at lightning speed. His supercharged reflexes and vision let him read the subtlest shifts in Cheelin's expression and posture. In an instant, he could sense her doubts, anticipate her needs, and respond with perfect timing. Yet as they settled into this new rhythm, neither of them suspected how drastically their lives were about to change. Over the past month, Ethan had quietly immersed himself in everything he could learn about relationships, books, articles, even advice from friends. Cheelin still didn't know why he'd gone to such lengths to be so considerate, but she couldn't deny how deeply she'd come to care for him. He seemed to understand her in ways no one ever had, and she found it impossible not to fall for him. In just 30 days, their friendship blossomed into something neither of them expected. They spent every spare moment together, talking late into the night and sharing small adventures around Juxia City. Then, on the very day she was supposed to go on a blind date with someone else, Ethan gently took her hand and asked her to be his girlfriend. Without a second thought, Cheelin said yes. She was the kind of woman who loved and hated with equal passion. Once she was sure of her feelings, hesitation had no place in her heart. 1 month was all it took for Cheelin to see clearly who Ethan really was. Kind, sincere, and utterly devoted. For her, there was no reason to hold back. And for Ethan, this was his first true love, even if, in his own words, echoes of the same bond had followed him from a past life. He believed a first love was always pure and wholehearted, unforgettable in its sincerity, and nothing could ever match it. That evening, under the glow of Juxia City's neon signs, the two of them walked hand in hand down the bustling streets. He smiled at her, she smiled back, and in that moment, everything felt exactly as it should. "Tomorrow, you need to take the day off," Ethan insisted, his brow creasing with concern, "or I'll carry you home myself so you can get some real rest." Cheelin offered a shrug as she rose from the park bench. Having just reactivated her super gene and stepped into the world as a soldier, she could handle far more than most people, but today, her body still reminded her she was only human. "No thanks," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "We finally have a chance to enjoy some normal time together." Ethan cocked an eyebrow. "Normal? You sure there isn't something else on your mind? Something that's making you rush off?" Cheelin paused, then reached out and clasped his hand. "How could I possibly rush away from you? The only thing I want is waking up beside you every morning." He met her gaze, a slow smile tugging at his lips. Cheelin rolled her eyes playfully. "Dream on." "What else is there to dream about, if not the best things in life?" Ethan countered, voice mock solemn. She laughed, shaking her head. She'd long ago realized that Ethan could argue circles around her, so she let the conversation drift. After a moment's silence, she tilted her head, genuine curiosity softening her expression. "Ethan, you're such an incredible person. Why do you even like me?" Ethan pretended to be taken aback. "Incredible. All I've got are a few convenience stores. That's not exactly spectacular. Cheelin squeezed his hand. Exactly. It's your kindness, your little stores. Everything you do it for others. That's what makes you special. Ethan's smile brightened, and he softly brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. Then I'm glad you think so, because there's no one else I'd rather share my world with. Ethan stirred his coffee and met Cheelin's curious gaze. You know I started from scratch, he began, voice calm. Built my company, then poured our profits right back into the community, funding schools and running water in those remote mountain villages. We even laid electrical lines. I set up a foundation to pay for road construction, though people claimed I was fundraising illegally. The more Cheelin learned about him, the more impressed she became. All of that takes a fortune, she said softly. Why do it? Ethan leaned back, tilting his head with a wry smile. Truth is, I have the money to spare, and a little good PR never hurts. To be honest, I do it partly to burnish my reputation. On blind date apps, some women tell me I'm wasting my money. Charity's a waste of time, they say. She blinked. Most people would sugarcoat their motives, but Ethan had laid his admission on the table without shame. Cheelin felt a new kind of respect stirring in her chest. He wasn't trying to appear saintly, he was just being real. That's refreshingly honest, she said, sliding her shoulder against his. Lots of folks talk big, but few would actually pick up a hammer or write a check. Exactly, Ethan agreed. You can count me among the doers. I prefer results over excuses. Cheelin rested her head against him, a small smile curling her lips. His candid confession surprised her, but it also made him more genuine in her eyes. He might have mixed motives, but at least he did something, and in the end, actions mattered more than perfect intentions. Around them, the cafe's late afternoon lights softened the edges of their world. Cheelin realized she wasn't looking for a flawless hero, just someone real, and Ethan, with all his flaws and honest ambitions, was exactly that. Ethan wasn't just all talk, he'd actually come through. Really? I hope you don't think I'm wasting money, Cheelin said with a half-smile, worry flickering in her dark eyes as they wandered past the evening crowds. He stopped to tuck a stray lock of her hair behind her ear, then brushed aside a mosquito with the faint ripple of his bioelectric field, a private trick he used to keep pests at bay. At nearly 2 meters tall, with broad shoulders and a sculpted build, Ethan drew second glances wherever he went. His sharp features and impeccable style made him stand out in any crowd, but tonight, all his attention was on Cheelin. Not at all, he replied, voice low and warm. I've enjoyed every second. They slipped into a small, lantern-lit courtyard and settled on a weathered bench beneath overhanging foliage. The distant hum of the city faded. Only the soft rustle of leaves and the glow of a lone street lamp remained. Ethan studied Cheelin's face, soft and reserved, her dark hair framing an expression that mixed curiosity with a trace of nervous excitement. After only a month together, tonight marked a milestone, their first real moment of closeness. He wanted more, but he knew better than to rush her. Slowly, he leaned in. Cheelin's breath caught, then relaxed as their lips met in a gentle, exploratory kiss. It was soft, respectful, everything a first kiss should be. He felt her shoulders loosen, her fingers resting lightly against his chest. Noticing her still hesitant body language, he drew back before she could pull away. He rested his thumb against her cheek. Thank you, he whispered. Under the warm lamplight, Cheelin's cheeks were softly flushed. She met his gaze, and in that shared look, they both sensed there would be many more moments like this to come. Ethan's voice was cure, albeit as he said, I'm sorry. Cheelin's eyes glistened. She placed a hand on his arm. You stopped at just the right moment. I got what I wanted. He smiled gently. You did? She laughed, a breathless, joyous sound that made his heart race. Later, he walked her home beneath the starry sky. When they finally parted, neither could shake the warmth still clinging to their skin. That night, Cheelin tossed and turned, her mind replaying every moment. Ethan lay awake as well, that using his supercharged intellect to regulate his hormones, just enough to calm the hunger, but never enough to dull the memory of her. If I ever feed again, he told himself, it should be with Cheelin. That experience was too rare to repeat with anyone else. With dawn came an all-too-familiar tremor in the air. A powerful life form was cutting through the upper atmosphere. Ethan bolted upright. After more than a month, it's here. He dared not slip back into the Marvel universe. If he did, he might miss this arrival. He resolved to go find Morgana instead, despite the cold memories he still harbored of her. He frowned. But why isn't it Angel Yan? Before he could puzzle it out, a brilliant column of light split the sky above Sumali's home. Descending on a shaft of silver radiance was an angel unlike any he'd seen, bathed in gleaming armor, her hair cascading in molten silver. Ethan's breath caught. The heavenly mechanist king. He-she. Chapter 53. He-she. My name is Wielding. After more than a month of study, Ethan had finally mapped out the properties of the Super Seminary world's sun, the same star that anchors the blue star's own solar system. To his surprise, its rays didn't trigger any of the mutations he'd come to expect. Quite the opposite, in fact. This sun radiated an almost palpable vitality, flooding Ethan with unusually abundant energy. Then, just as abruptly as it had appeared, the vision faded, and with no mutations to investigate, he let it slip from his mind. He-she is here. At the news that Tianji King He-she had arrived on Earth, Ethan's thoughts snapped back into focus. It had to be connected to Sumali's vanished dark plane intelligence. Without that critical data, He-she must have been forced to alter his strategy and come in person. Ethan paused, brow furrowing. This must be a clone, right? He-she's cloning technique was an offshoot of Sun Wukong's famed duplication magic. But unlike Wukong's illusory replicas, King He-she's copies possessed full, physical bodies, true battle dolls, or as some high-tech theorists called them, combat constructs. He-she had reverse-engineered the idea after witnessing Wukong's clones in the modern conflict against the Tao Ti civilization, refining it into something far more formidable. Ethan straightened. If He-she truly stood before him in a clone body, it meant the real king was elsewhere, an unknown calculation in an already dangerous game, and Ethan intended to find out exactly why He-she had come. Hexie's genius alone couldn't explain how quickly this breakthrough came together. The more plausible explanation was that during his earlier academic exchange in the Liang civilization, officially billed as a friendly diplomatic mission on behalf of the Angel civilization, Hexie had quietly studied Sun Wukong's legendary clone technique. Building on the conceptual foundations of Wukong's power, he reverse-engineered his own cloning process. That wasn't all. During his time among the Liang people, Hexie had also acquired their solar flare technology, then improved it to create a controlled flare furnace that minimized collateral damage. In other words, what was advertised as a simple cultural exchange must have been an extravagant covert research program. The scale of knowledge transfer was staggering. Ethan's mind raced. If he could get his hands on one of Hexie's android duplicates and smuggle it into the Marvel Universe, it might be worth showing to Galvatron. With Galvatron's analytical prowess and resources, they could dissect the clone's core programming and perhaps reverse-engineer some of Hexie's most advanced techniques. It might be the key to leveling the playing field. Ethan hovered silently atop the crumbling tower, his supervision sweeping the deserted Sumali estate below. He focused on He-she, who several kilometers away had paused in the ruined foyer, confusion flickering across her features. She still can't read my dark plane signature, he thought, a small surge of satisfaction warming his chest. His barrier against dark plane detection must be stronger than he dared hope. Inside the shattered manor, He-she's spectral clone traced every corner in search of clues. She'd believed that infiltrating Sumali's home would at least reveal something, an echo of the murderer, a fragment of the fatal moment. Instead, the dark plane remained utterly blank. The scene unfolded before her, just as it had when she first discovered the body, an unbroken flow with no hints of who struck the blow or how. It was like a film reel with crucial frames missing, and every question hung in the silence. A soft voice broke the stillness, drifting into her mind. "Hello, Angel." He-she skidded to a halt. Her head whipped around the cavernous room. "Who's there?" she demanded, heart hammering. Her gaze snapped to the shattered window panes. On the ridge beyond, backlit by a waning moon, stood a lone figure. He hovered in the night air, body shimmering with an otherworldly glow. She flared her dark plane's sight, only to find it rendered useless. His aura was locked away, completely impenetrable. He-she's breath caught. No clue, no reading, nothing. Whoever, or whatever, he was, he'd erased himself from her senses entirely. and in that moment she realized just how much of the truth might still be hidden in the shadows. "Did you kill these people?" She regarded him with cool certainty. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "Yes." She raised an eyebrow. "Good." Caught off guard, Ethan had no choice but to admit everything. "Who are you?" She paused her interrogation about Sumali's fate and studied him with mild curiosity. "I'm from Kryptonian civilization, Ethan." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Kryptonian civilization? I've never heard of it." She gave a small, resigned shrug. "That's because we're dead. Krypton no longer exists." Ethan tilted his head, watching her carefully. She was calm, but there was something odd. The dark plane readout she normally used to analyze strangers showed nothing. An impenetrable blank. Even angels, gods, and super warriors would find themselves blind without that data. Trusting body language and facial microexpressions alone? Too risky. She studied him in silence, then said, "You came to me. I find that interesting." Ethan's gaze flickered, but he offered no response. In that moment, two strangers, one a survivor from a lost world, the other a deadly enigma, measured each other's strength and resolve. Each waited for the other to make the next move. "Is something wrong?" She asked, folding her arms as she hovered in midair. She had intended to land, to put some distance between them, but the unsettling readings from the dark plane kept her from sitting still. Instead, she caught Ethan's gaze and gave a quick nod. In an instant, both of them shot upward into the sky. Ethan followed her ascent without hesitation. She examined him closely as they climbed higher, her brow furrowed in puzzlement. On the dark plane, there should have been fluctuations of dark energy, traces of a superpower algorithm in use, but her scanners detected nothing. No dark energy signature, no algorithmic imprint. She replayed in her mind how superpower algorithms work. They siphon dark energy and transform it into abilities, thunderstorms, fire manipulation, even the complex routines of a supergene engine. For example, Angel Yan, the thunder god of war, can command lightning, but that is courtesy of her innate supergene code, not an external algorithm. Yet here was Ethan, defying all logic. She's onboard space-based system and its computing cluster had already run through every hypothesis. Perhaps Ethan's supergene included an undiscovered branch that channels power without relying on dark energy. Or maybe he possessed a unique internal mechanism, his own superpower algorithm, hidden deep within his biology. She couldn't tell which, or whether both theories were entirely wrong. As the wind rushed past them, she kept her eyes fixed on Ethan. She needed answers, and fast. Ethan knew that maintaining a spirit of curiosity and enthusiasm for the unknown was indispensable to any true researcher. In the brief time he'd spent with he'd already managed to captivate her with his discoveries. He leaned forward and offered her a small, knowing smile. "So," he asked quietly, "have you figured out who you really are yet?" She met his gaze without flinching. After a moment's hesitation, she spoke in an even tone. "I'm just an ordinary angel. You can call me Whirling." At her words, she instinctively sealed off her dark plane profile. If Ethan tried to probe it, her firewall and genetic safeguards would immediately raise alarms. After all, few civilizations possessed the angel's inside eye technology. Most intrusions into dark plane data merely produced static and alerts. But Ethan's talent for seamless access was exceptional. He nodded thoughtfully. "Whirling," he repeated. "I've heard angels are especially drawn to phenomena like this." From beneath his coat, he produced a hefty slab of Sumali dar, silver. The iridescent metal, easily the size of Hishi's forearm, seemed to ripple with hidden energy. She stared at it, genuine surprise softening her usually steely expression. A no-nonsense woman like her, battle-hardened and analytical, couldn't help but be intrigued by something so rare, especially knowing that Ethan's celestial-grade supercomputer could analyze and detect any event in the universe, down to the motion of individual atoms. She leaned closer, curiosity rekindled, ready for whatever revelation he had in store. By the stars, Kesha doesn't even have to dispatch scouts. She already knows which galaxy holds the dark silver vein. Chapter 54, Supergene and the Supergene Engine. It's no exaggeration to say that in the original storyline, God-level beings could observe and analyze the motion of individual atoms as easily as we might track a falling leaf. The Super Seminary itself had long since mastered this microscopic frontier. Deep within the dark plane, it housed a celestial computer known as the Treasure House of Sacred Knowledge, second in might only to the legendary Great Clock. This repository recorded every scrap of cutting-edge science and technology from the angelic civilization, along with relevant data on all major races in the known universe. More than that, it could precisely calculate and predict the entire developmental arc of galactic societies. Together, the Treasure House and the Great Clock formed what designers called a cosmic tree model, a simulation that reproduced the universe in its entirety. Drawing on the Big Bang framework, these twin engines computed interactions across every plane of existence, from the familiar material realm to the mysteries of dark matter. Their simulation began at a single, explosive core and branched outward, tracing a sprawling, tree-like network of particles. In this way, they reconstructed the universe's morphology down to its smallest details and opened a door for any who could unlock their secrets. Ethan hovered before the immense sphere floating in the void. Its diameter dwarfed anything he'd ever known, a perfect globe suspended against the backdrop of infinite space. Hundreds of billions of glowing points of light orbited its surface. Each point was a galaxy in miniature, and with a simple command, the device in Ethan's hand could zoom in on any of them. Star systems, planets, mountain ranges, ocean currents, even climate patterns would unfold in astonishing detail. As long as no advanced civilization had reshaped a world or snuffed out its sun, the data remained impeccably accurate in real time. His companion, Dinghai, had given this marvel the name the known universe. Every celestial body within its reach could be charted, analyzed, and predicted with uncanny precision. But beyond that boundary lay the so-called marginal spaces, regions where the machine's calculations unraveled. Wormhole coordinates spun into nonsense, star charts blurred, and even the most minute fluctuations became unpredictable. Travelers who dared cross into these outer fringes often found themselves light years off course or stranded in total darkness. It was in one such margin that the fallen King Huaye and his million-strong legion of exiles had been cast out by the angelic host. There, at the jagged edge of reality, they lurked beyond the reach of accurate maps, ready to exploit any traveler foolish enough to stray from the known universe. And now, with Ethan and Dinghai standing at the threshold of that boundary, the real adventure was only just beginning. Even with the cosmic tree simulation humming at full power, it still devoured unimaginable quantities of energy and resources. That's why she had been astonished when Ethan, the one she'd hoped to trust, revealed a hidden stockpile of dark silver big enough to power half a world. She studied him across the gleaming obsidian table. "Where did you get this dark silver?" Ethan gave a casual shrug. "Why does it matter? It's not part of our agreement." Her eyes narrowed. Of course he was dodging her question, but she refused to let him off the hook. It was unthinkable that he hailed from another universe. At worst, he must have scavenged it from the uncharted fringe beyond known space, a region so chaotic that even the celestial supercomputers, the legendary big clocks, couldn't model its storms. "You know why I'm asking," she said evenly. "The angelic order would pay a king's ransom for this alloy." Ethan's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "They'll have it." She allowed herself a brief nod, though her mind raced. If his offhand confirmation was real, then this so-called Kryptonian civilization he'd mentioned truly did exist out in that fringe abyss, and this dark silver was one of their lost treasures. She pressed on. "And what do you want in return?" He leaned forward, eyes glowing with intent. "Not silver or credits this time, but your pledge, your trust." Her expression didn't waver, but behind her calm facade something ancient stirred. Across every star and system in known space, all remembered the rite of angelic matching, the sacred covenant that bound entire civilizations together. Now Ethan was asking to weave himself into that covenant, and she had no idea what price he would demand in the end. Ethan drew in a steadying breath and faced the figure before him. "I want your angelic civilization's super gene technology and divine body advancement," he announced. Angel Erling, known in another life as the Tianji King, she remained perfectly still. Her expression betrayed nothing. She had cloaked herself in this angelic guise precisely to avoid tedious rituals and calculations, Angels, after all, relied on the Holy Kesha's sacred archive to identify super warriors and male gods, a process she had long ago deemed far too dull. If Ethan pressed her true identity, he would not only fail but invite her quiet, amused scorn. "Impossible," she replied at last, her voice calm and measured. Ethan's chest heaved with the effort of his words. Erling lifted a single eyebrow, unruffled by his display of emotion. Tens of thousands of years old, she had weathered catastrophes far worse than a mortal's exasperation. Each civilization's super gene synthesis and divine body cultivation are utterly unique, she explained. We cannot simply hand them over. He shook his head, forcing his gaze not to falter. You misunderstand me. I don't want your angel's actual genes, only the know-how, the techniques themselves. Erling's stillness turned almost imperceptibly colder. She folded her arms. Even so, she said, what you ask is beyond negotiation. I'm sorry, Ethan, but I cannot share those secrets. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, having anticipated resistance. When he opened them again, they burned with determination. The refusal only marked the beginning of his challenge and of Angel Erling's long test of his resolve. Chapter 5. Understanding Supergenes. Ethan stood before the holoscreen, absorbing every line of data as Dr. Morales guided him through humanity's greatest breakthrough, supergenes. According to the latest research, supergenes fall into two distinct categories. 1. Original supergenes. 2. Dark matter computer implants, aka supergene engines. On paper, both grant extraordinary abilities, but in practice, they're worlds apart. An individual carrying an original supergene, no enhancements, can certainly manipulate their power. Yet when they face off against a super soldier fitted with a dark matter computer, it's as if they've been tied to a lamppost. Why? The dark matter computer is embedded directly into the carrier's DNA. Think of it as a high-performance, external plug-in that not only sharpens control over one's innate ability, but also amplifies its raw output. The analogy works like this. Without a dark matter computer, you're trying to release flames with nothing but your own muscle memory and instinct. With the implant, you launch infernos at will, larger, hotter, faster, and the gap in casting speed and power is staggering. Every carrier has the same kind of supergene, yet those with the computer always dominate. Their foes can barely react before the supercharged attack lands. Dr. Morales pointed to a diagram illustrating gene expandability and compatibility. Expandability measures how readily a supergene accepts an implant. Some genes are more modular than others. Compatibility defines how well the computer's software interface meshes with the host's DNA. Only a perfect match unlocks the system's full potential. You see, she explained, an unactivated supergene is like a computer that's been built but never switched on. Installing the dark matter computer and drawing power to it is the equivalent of plugging the machine into an outlet and hitting start. Once activated, the host can access new functions, optimize energy distribution, and upgrade abilities on the fly. She tapped the schematic again. Different supergenes demand different computer configurations, just as gamers choose hardware to match the demands of their software. And when we talk about fusion genes, think of that as swapping out components, upgrading RAM, swapping GPUs. The fusion process replaces old gene segments with new ones, streamlining the whole system. Ethan absorbed the information. In theory, anyone could possess a supergene. In practice, without the dark matter computer, you'd be outclassed the moment you stepped onto the battlefield. And that, he realized, was exactly why the military was racing to perfect the integration process. As the session ended, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Mastering the dark matter computer would decide who reigned supreme in this new age of human evolution. Ethan settled into the observation deck's hollow chair and waved a hand through the floating data panels. Think of space-time technology as a vast operating system, he began. It's like complex, large-scale software. You have to code it from scratch, debug every module, establish compatibility across countless platforms, and even learn its assembly language before you can use it effectively. He flipped to the next display. By contrast, space-time genes, or what some call void genes, are more like pre-installed frameworks. They come with built-in functions you can tap into immediately, although you still need to master their deeper interfaces. The void engine, sometimes dubbed the black hole engine, is just an even bigger bundle of pre-written code. Powerful, yes, but still requiring skill to integrate. She folded her arms and studied him, her brows knitting together in curiosity. So you're claiming to be what? An original super gene? Her tone wasn't mocking, it was intrigued. She replayed in her mind how easily Ethan had dispatched Sumali, one of the so-called second-generation fighters, a specimen bioengineered by the demon civilization. Sumali's flame and rubber body genes might have made him a terror on the battlefield, little more than a low-end computer running a handful of clumsy subroutines, but Ethan had dismantled him in seconds. Ethan met her gaze calmly. Exactly that. My genes come from a civilization that mastered the original super gene long before anyone else. If we'd ever gotten our hands on a void engine, we would have leapt light years beyond every other species. Unfortunately, our home is gone. She stared at him a moment longer, then shook her head. You look like any other attractive human male, she said, forcing a smirk. And your civilization's destruction sounds a little too neat. Prove it to me. Show me something I can't fake or license. Ethan smiled thinly and tapped another command. Around them, the holographics hummed into life. Schematics of gravitational singularities, energy signatures no known species could reproduce, gene sequence logs stamped with impossible timestamps. Fair enough, he replied. But be warned, once you see the truth, there's no unseeing it. She leaned back, his expression carefully neutral. She's neither Angel Jixin nor Angel Yan, and she's no prodigy. I can't simply hand over the Sacred Knowledge Repository's source code, or Tianren 7, just because someone asks. I don't have the authority to make that call. Despite his refusal, she couldn't hide the flicker of interest in his eyes. Ethan's original supergene was unlike anything the Angels had ever encountered. If she could get his hands on it, he just might crack the secret to enhancing the Angels' own genetic frameworks. Ethan met his gaze squarely. Is that your final decision? She said nothing. Ethan paused, then gave a firm nod. Very well, I'll negotiate directly with the Liang civilization. With that, Ethan turned on his heel and strode away, leaving alone with his unspoken curiosity. Chapter 55, Beneath the Unforgiving Moon. This is a bad idea, she warned, his tone calm but firm. The Liang civilization won't be so easy to negotiate with. Ethan offered a wry smile. You're right, but I trust my ability to handle whatever comes. He reached for the dark plane communicator and sealed off the link. As the device went silent, a faint shimmer rippled around him, his transformation energy awakening, just as it had when he met Qilin. Mastery over his form was one of the few advantages he possessed, and he would need it now more than ever. She caught his sleeve. If you block the dark plane feed, I won't be able to track you, and that dark silver blade you carry, even if it's considered obsolete, its edge is still terrifyingly lethal. Gods and super soldiers without regenerative abilities can only strike once before they collapse. If it weren't for Ansu Silver's unique alloy and the fact that we can't power the Godkiller drive, this weapon would be the most sophisticated in the known universe. Ethan met Hishi's gaze, determination shining in his eyes. That's why I'm taking it with me. With a final nod, he severed the connection, let the transformation engulf him, and vanished into the shadows before Hishi could protest again. Dark silver weapons, Godslayer armaments, even flame-level blades, they were all perfectly matched and ready for circulation. If these ever reached the Liang civilization, Hexie just knew she'd be scolded to death by that fearless woman of hers. Defeated, she muttered, All right, you win. Ethan's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and then he simply vanished. Hexie stared at the empty air. He actually walked away. After everything she'd conceded, a moment of stunned silence gave way to furious disbelief. Did he really have no interest in bargaining or posturing? No complex tactics, just deal fell through. Bye. Who would have guessed the galaxy's toughest super soldier was so straightforward? Panicking, Hexie shook her head and steeled herself. She couldn't refuse to report this intel. Connecting to the central network, she uploaded the data at once. Alarms blinked. Within seconds, the intelligence corps reached out to Kesha. Little Shasha, what have you done this time? Kesha's voice crackled through the comm, tinged with exasperation and an unmistakable undercurrent of warmth. Hexie closed her eyes, heart pounding. In all these years, she'd heard that nickname only once before, and now, Once more, it filled her with a strange, hopeful tremor. Keisha closed her eyes and sighed. "I wish this were just a bad dream," she muttered, recalling Hexy's warning the last time they'd stumbled onto something huge. Back then, it had been a massive basket of dark alloy. Impressive, but nowhere near this. Now she stood staring at a single slab of dark silver so vast that if the Liang civilization melted it all down into blades, they could arm thousands of warriors. Suyin-forged weapons already cut through third-generation divine bodies like paper. Even those mighty fighters wouldn't survive many strikes from this. "You were absolutely right," Keisha admitted, turning to Hexy. She rubbed her temples, remembering how careless she'd been. Why hadn't she told her best friend when she went off to Blue Star? But she couldn't really blame Hexy. His intentions were good. He just hadn't expected Ethan to be so direct. Ethan had shown up unannounced, laid out his deal in a single breath, and, when she hesitated, walked away without a second thought. That bold decisiveness had won over half a dozen traders on the spot. And now, Keisha found herself oddly intrigued by him. Even Hexy, with all his knowledge of dark plane technology, couldn't penetrate Ethan's secrets. What kind of power or cunning did he possess to keep his true capabilities hidden so completely? Leaning closer to the shining slab, Keisha whispered into the dim light, "Whatever you are planning, Ethan, you've certainly gotten my attention." She straightened up, resolve hardening. It was time to prepare. Whatever came next, she'd bell. Ready. Shasha leaned forward over the data display, eyes wide. This original supergene, it's not just more power, it actually masks you on the dark plane, completely invisible even to super soldiers and gods. It's like wearing black armor that no scanner can detect. If Ethan wields this in a stealth strike, he'd be unstoppable. Hexy's brow furrowed. Who would have imagined it was that potent? "But you're missing something," Kesha said, his tone calm but imposing. "It's not enough to have the gene itself. He also needs the supergene reactor technology and the divine body upgrade protocols. That combination is exactly what a civilization requires to leap from god-making status to a true super-god civilization. In the known universe, there are only a handful of those." He fixed Shasha with a look. "Shasha, can we discuss this in private for a minute?" Hexy's shoulders hunched. Becoming a super-god civilization is no simple feat, and right now Ansuin takes priority over technological ambitions. Kesha waved a hand dismissively. "One more super-god civilization won't tip the balance. Besides, we're already exceptional. Why not reach even higher?" Hexy said nothing more, her silence echoing the weight of the choice before them. At the very edge of known space, within the bounds of the Kryptonian civilization, Queen Kesha opened a secure channel to Angel Yan, who was now hurtling toward Blue Star. "Yan," she said calmly, "I need you to use Blue Star's public broadcast network to relay a message." Angel Yan's voice crackled through her comm unit. "I'm in position outside Blue Star's atmosphere, Your Majesty. What are my orders?" "Tell them our angels not only agree to the transaction," Kesha continued, "but are also prepared to give up 3 units of A-grade supergene engine material." Her tone left no room for argument. The mistaken terms of the deal had been her own oversight, and these 3 precious units would come from her personal reserves. "Understood, Queen Kesha." Though confusion flickered in his voice, Angel Yan dared not hesitate. "I'll make the broadcast now." As he signed off, Kesha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Unbeknownst to her, or to anyone aboard Blue Star, Ethan had engineered the entire situation just to see her driven to distraction. Ethan scowled. He'd brought the Ansuian ore here expressly to trade, but after being pushed around in endless haggling, he'd simply had enough. It was far better to hand it over to the ambitious Liang civilization. At least they weren't sycophantic enough to spoil someone just because of good looks. Ansuian ore was the most coveted resource in any god-crafting civilization, and even in the super-god realms. The Angels' blockade had driven its scarcity to new heights. By contrast, super-gene engine and divine body technologies were old news. 3 generations of angelic gods had already gone off to serve as mercenaries. Nobody in their right mind paid a fortune for tech that ended up on the open market anyway. Ethan felt he'd made a fair offer and refused to stoop for the Angels' overhyped super-gene scripture. When she pressed him still further, Ethan simply walked away. If things went sour here, he thought, He could always trick Reyna into buying the Ansuian ore instead. She'd be far easier to fool. On the surface, the Liang civilization may no longer bear the title of a heavenly civilization, but Xuantianji's stance betrays their true intent. They still long to force the entire cosmos to submit to their divine power. As long as the angel civilization remained dominant, those ambitions lay comfortably hidden. Yet if Liang ever claims the fabled Ansu silver, will they bother to conceal it? Even the Silverwing realm of Holy Kesha could only slow them. Behind closed doors, they'll become all the more brazen. I can hardly fault them. Sincerity is a fragile thing. I'd hoped my own light might illuminate the moon, only to find it casting shadows into the darkest depths. Ethan drew a slow breath. Ethan of the Kryptonian civilization. No, perhaps I should introduce myself as Angel Yan of the angelic civilization. Chapter 56. Acquiring the artifact without warning. Every electromagnetic frequency on Blue Star, every radio station, every digital broadcast, even the secret dark plane channels, was seized by a single, resonant voice. People of Blue Star, it declared, the angelic civilization wishes to renew our trade. In addition to the standard terms, we will include 3 super gene reactor components. The message repeated twice, in case anyone had missed it. For the citizens below, confusion reigned. Angelic civilization? Kryptonians? Was this some prank by a bored hacker? No one could say. High above the surface, Ethan hovered on silent wings. His heart skipped a beat when he heard the promise of 3 super gene reactor components. Those modules, so rare and complex, they were essential parts of the dark matter computers used for gene implantation. Gathering even one of them could take years. 3 might take a lifetime. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. Then again, I do possess transmutation magic. Could I simply convert other materials into what I need? A smile flickered across his face, but he quickly shook his head. The spell's limitations were unpredictable. Better not tempt fate. With that, Ethan spread his wings and rose higher, vanishing into the pale morning sky, already plotting his next move. Angel Yan had been replaying the emergency broadcast on loop when a blur of motion tore across the sky. In an instant, a man in a sleek black flight suit decelerated into a hover before him. Angel Yan, the newcomer said crisply, I am Ethan of the Kryptonian civilization. Angel Yan's eyes widened in shock. Before he could utter another word, a second figure, an exact clone of he-she, drifted down to join Ethan, hands folded in respectful greeting. Your Highness, the clone intoned. Angel Yan snapped to attention. We have delivered every item you requested, except Ansuian. Where is she? The clone's confident posture wavered. Over the years, he-she's proclivity for hoarding, even things of only moderate value, had left her fiancé perpetually exasperated. Now, however, excuses felt hollow. Ansuian? She repeated, voice faltering. Angel Yan's face went pale. He keyed a command on his gauntlet and unleashed a cascade of scanning beams into the sky. Hold there, let me see. A moment later, Angel Yan's eyes snapped open. Of course, that's why Queen Kesha was so frantic. Ethan crossed his arms, brow raised. You failed to bring Ansuian with you? Do you not trust our angel's transport protocols? The clone hung her head. I no longer trust the transporter's calibration. Ethan allowed himself a half smile. All right, let's sort out the transporter settings at once. We can't afford any more delays. Angel Yan hesitated. Yuerling? He murmured, bewildered. Tianji King Hexi had never used that name. Before Angel Yan could say more, Hexi cut off the channel with an abrupt flicker of the link. Enough, the king ordered icily. Cease your nonsense. Angel Yan fell silent, watching Ethan swivel around to the holo displays. Ethan pulled up schematics for the Super Gene Engine and the Divine Body program, scrolling rapidly through endless fields of data. As he'd suspected, most of the slots were blank, reserved for angelic supergenes, no doubt. A headache formed at his temples. The Super Gene Engine wasn't ready for prime time. The dark matter processors they'd fabricated so far wouldn't support every supergene variant. Only the mass-produced modules would adapt seamlessly. That meant that even once Ethan obtained the raw materials, he'd still have to design a dark matter processor tailored to his current Destruction Day Kryptonian genome. And that was before he contemplated fusing Broly's cells. The archive mentioned 2 tiers of advancement, supergenetic hardware and supergenetic code. The hardware was rare but attainable. The true genetic code modules were the real prize, known only to the angelic and demonic civilizations. Ethan leaned back, weighing the scale of the challenge ahead. Eternity is the forbidden T-demons used to bring the dead back to life. By contrast, the angelic civilization reveres life itself and refuses to employ such unnatural means. Much more subtle is the supergenetic code, an ability that closely resembles the Otsutsuki clan's wedge technique in Naruto lore. Like the wedge, the supercode can copy and digitize itself before infiltrating a host's body. Once implanted, a black, diamond-shaped emblem appears on the palm as proof of infection. In reality, this emblem is nothing more than compressed data, the entire blueprint of an Otsutsuki being, stored like a frozen file. Over time, and even more rapidly through combat, the file gradually unfreezes, restoring more and more of the original Otsutsuki's genetic data. When the process is complete, the host's body is rewritten entirely in the Otsutsuki's image, key and all, and the resurrection is fulfilled. Supergene technology goes a step beyond. Rather than relying on a host to carry and ultimately replace itself, the supercode can directly reconstruct an organism given sufficient energy and raw materials. Still, it's often more practical and far less resource-intensive to commandeer an existing body, letting nature's evolution do much of the work. By radiating and mutating ordinary genes, supergene tech guides their natural progression into truly super genes, unlocking new powers that no ordinary living being could ever achieve. Ethan paused only a moment before shaking his head. The Kryptonian gene he carried was already a perfected supergene. Subjecting it to further radiation mutations, without a celestial-level supercomputer to guide and stabilize the process, would be far too dangerous. Besides, with his body already resembling Doomsday in human form, the last thing he needed was another unpredictable alteration. Hishi's lips curved into a playful smile. "Well, what do you think?" Ethan met her gaze calmly. He'd already dismissed her credibility, but she didn't seem to mind. She was only interested in securing his body, not debating genetics. "Here." He reached into his coat and pulled out the blood sample, placing it in her waiting hand. Angel Yan's eyes went wide. "That's a lot of dark silver extract." She didn't even flinch. With a quick gesture, she ran a rapid analysis on the sample, then fed it straight into the wormhole processor at her side. Dark silver matter was remarkably easy to decode. Even a civilization stuck at a primitive second-generation technology level could work out its composition without resorting to dark matter supercomputers or specialized genetic platforms. Ethan nodded, satisfied. At least this way, the sample would be logged safely into Kesha's archives, far better than chopping up a corpse to fashion weapons from dark silver fragments. Ethan gave Hishi a confident smile. "That wasn't so hard, was it? Farewell." With a faint shimmer, he vanished. Hishi's space-based monitoring system, operating at full capacity, frantically scanned for any trace of a wormhole, dark energy residue, or other anomalies, but came up empty. She frowned. Ethan's powers and his secrets just kept growing. Angel Yan hovered nearby, uncertain. Why had the Sky Sovereign herself come all the way here? Surely dispatching an angel to handle Dark Suyin would have been far less dramatic. Hishi, Angel Yan ventured. Why intervene personally? Hishi shook her head, her expression unreadable. "Whatever happened today stays between us. Don't mention it to anyone else." Angel Yan bowed. "Understood, Your Majesty." Still, she knew she had to brief Queen Kesha. Hishi's command could curb wider panic, but the Queen would decide their next move. "Very well," Hishi said, waving a hand. "That's all." With that, she vanished in a flash of light. Left alone, Angel Yan activated her comlink. First came the full report on the Dark Plane disturbance, sent directly to Holy Kesha. Then she stepped through a starlight portal and returned to Blue Star. Back on Blue Star, Ethan wasted no time. He transferred the material samples and Encry, TID data into the Superbrain's core. Within hours, indeed, in less than a day, he had mastered the sprawling knowledge, quantum dark energy matrices, wormhole stabilization protocols, even the hidden frameworks of spatial sovereignty. Each new insight only whetted his appetite for more. By the time Angel Yan rejoined him, Ethan was already devising the next stage of his plan, confident that nothing, not even the secrets of kings, could hold him back. No scientific prodigy could accomplish this, yet it's precisely where Ethan holds the advantage. Chapter 57. biomass computer. In the dim glow of his private laboratory, Ethan hovered over the humming supergene engine, eyes flicking across streams of real-time data. Supergene engine technology is more powerful than I imagined, he murmured, tapping commands into the console. Information flooded his mind at speeds rivaling the most advanced celestial supercomputers, nearly at the Planck time frontier, if only in effect. He leaned back and reviewed the core problem. The Doomsday genome, a Kryptonian derivative granting near-absolute durability, and the Broly gene, raw, explosive strength, simply couldn't coexist. Whenever one attempted to overwrite or merge with the other, the two dominant sequences fought for supremacy, corrupting the hybrid. The only foolproof workaround he knew would be to interlace both codes at the embryonic stage, just as Dr. Garrow did when he crafted the SARU, artificial humans. But Ethan dismissed that path out of hand. You don't incubate an unstoppable warrior until you yourself are invincible, he said, recalling the fiasco of his overgrown cucumber mutation. That botched experiment had taught him a hard lesson about premature shortcuts. They always backfire. For now, granting someone else that level of power would be like handing them a loaded weapon, and he wasn't ready to risk it. Ethan tapped a fresh series of inputs to reroute the engine's output into his biomass computation matrix. Let's run a new simulation, he whispered, voice low with determination. If he could stabilize two such titanic genomes in silico, he might crack the code at last and usher in a new era of genetic mastery. Ethan frowned as he reviewed the schematics. Each supergene engine, essentially a dark matter computer, comes with its own bespoke programs and functions, which is why no two are alike. He couldn't simply build his processor from off-the-shelf Super Seminary components. They wouldn't withstand the combined power of his Doomsday and Broly genes. He tapped a pencil against the table. The energy output from his Doomsday, Kryptonian, and Broly gene splices was off the charts. If he tried to cram seminary-grade hardware into that maelstrom without upgrading it first, the system would instantly overload and burn out. And if that happened, control would slip away. He had no idea what a runaway dark matter engine might do in his body. Ethan had always been uneasy about implanting delicate machinery beneath his skin. The idea of fusing cold metal with living flesh made him shudder. Cyberpsychosis wasn't just science fiction. He was convinced a fully biological approach would be safer and more harmonious with his mutated DNA. A thought struck him. What if he used Doomsday gene cells themselves as the computational core? In effect, a biomass computer grown from his own modified genes, programmable, adaptive, and powerful enough to handle the workload without the risk of mechanical failure. He leaned forward, excitement sparking in his eyes. If he could master that technique, he'd finally have a control system perfectly matched to his unique genetic signature, no seminary materials required, no risk of overload. Now the real work began, coaxing those Doomsday cells to function as living processors. Ethan felt the Broly gene surge through his bloodstream, fused directly into his own DNA. All the while, the Doomsday biomass computer embedded in his cells ran a single overriding protocol: suppression and control. Now he faced a new challenge, reconciling these two rival supergenes without letting them tear him apart. A plan took shape in his mind. Broly's genetic biomass computer, though capable of limitless growth in raw power, was notoriously unstable and lacked the evolutionary finesse of Doomsday's. In terms of adaptability, no system could match Doomsday's. No one dared claim supremacy over it. Even Darkseid's Omega effect required a death and rebirth before it could sync with that program. Biomass computers and dark matter computers shared similar goals, but they operated on fundamentally different principles. Ethan's idea to fuse both systems into one cohesive whole had never been tried before. If he could pull it off, he alone would wield both legacies. In the sprawling arena of the Super Seminary universe, most would have chosen a dark matter computer as their backbone. Yet Ethan pressed ahead with his risky hybrid approach because these two genes, Doomsday's and Broly's, held the power to slay gods in the heavens and collapse reality at its foundations. He refused to abandon any chance of merging them completely, no matter how unprecedented or perilous the path. Ethan never stopped pacing. The soft hum of the biomass computer was the only thing keeping his thoughts anchored. He muttered under his breath, "My Doomsday gene is still nowhere near strong enough. I need more power. What he'd managed so far was little more than a pale imitation. The true doomsday, ancient, unstoppable, had slaughtered entire worlds. It destroyed Apocalypse and even slew Darkseid himself. By comparison, the makeshift versions the rogue Kryptonians produced were crude, unstable bioweapons. Ethan knew he could have engineered a more potent strain long ago, but he'd held back, terrified of losing control over something so lethal. "Ethan, you look exhausted," came Keelan's gentle voice from the doorway. She crossed her arms, concern etched on her face. "You've barely been home." He gave her a weary smile. "Yeah, the lab's been challenging." She didn't press him further. She never did. Yet her presence was a welcome distraction from the failures that haunted him every waking hour. Behind him, the biomass computer blinked red. After hundreds of attempts, he'd finally synthesized a stronger doomsday gene, but each time it reached the assimilation phase, where the synthetic genome merges with living cells, the system crashed. Months of funding and labor vanished in an instant. It was the cruel arithmetic of cutting-edge research, countless repetitions, endless resource drains, and the constant specter of defeat. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and turned back to the console. "I'm not up for a break," he confessed. "If I stop now, I'll never finish." Cheelan stepped beside him, her quiet confidence a steadying force. Together they watched the computer's screen, because despite every setback, Ethan wasn't ready to quit. Not when the promise of a truly unstoppable doomsday was within reach. Ethan glanced at his watch, then looked up at Cheelan with a small, apologetic smile. "Sorry to keep you waiting." Cheelan leaned forward, concern in her dark eyes. "What's wrong? Do you need my help with something?" He shook his head. "Nothing serious. I'm just planning to open a new branch of my cafe chain. I've been scouting locations." Though Ethan owned 5 popular beverage shops, Cheelan never cared about his wealth. In her world, money paled next to influence, and she had influence in spades. "So business is really booming, huh?" she said, genuine surprise in her voice. Launching a new outlet meant the existing stores were doing well enough to support expansion. Ethan hesitated before answering. He didn't want to admit how tight his cash flow was, how tempting it was to borrow just to keep everything moving. "It's going fine," he said instead, forcing a confident smile. "Good," Cheelan replied. She paused, studying him carefully. "But please, don't feel pressured to take out a loan just to impress anyone, especially not my father. Grow your business at your own pace. I have no doubt you'll make plenty of money in time." Ethan nodded, appreciating her steady support even as he worried she'd see right through his facade. Together, they returned to poring over maps and rental agreements, determined to find the perfect spot for his 6th store, without any messy loans or unnecessary grandstanding. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a confident smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's not as risky as you think. Business is booming. The gap between my costs and revenues is huge. I've already saved up enough to open a new branch and still have money left over. That's a better return than any bank interest. Frankly, I'd rather open a store than gamble on some speculative investment." Across the table, Cheelan let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She'd worried about him taking unnecessary risks. One misstep, and he could lose everything, even his family's support. Hearing him speak so assuredly eased her mind. "I'm glad you feel confident," she said, "but where will this new branch be? Back here in Juxia City?" Ethan shook his head. "Actually, I'm setting my sights on the capital, Northern Star." Cheelan's eyebrows shot up. Northern Star was a whole new ballgame, a much larger market with equally larger challenges. He sounded so nonchalant about it. "The capital? Are you sure you can pull that off?" "Absolutely," he replied. "I'll sort out all the logistics once I'm home. Besides, you remember the special twist I put in our signature drink? People can't get enough of it. The taste practically sells itself." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. He'd clearly thought this through, from the marketing angle to the financials. Best of all, this plan would keep his in-laws off his back. If anyone audited his accounts, they'd see solid profits, not the red ink they feared. With a final, relieved smile, Cheelan leaned forward and said, "All right, Ethan. Let's make Northern Star our next success story." Cheelan paced the length of the room, worry etched on her face. "Where did he find the money to woo and marry my daughter? I'm afraid it might be money laundering. If that's true, we'd all be disgraced. To quiet the rumors, Ethan had thrown himself into making his 5 shops turn a profit. Even so, they only pulled in 8 to 10,000 a day, just enough to cover the rent. Land in Northern Star is far more expensive than in Juxia City, Cheelin added, voice tight. We're in for a real struggle. Chapter 58, Shifts on Blue Star. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a playful grin tugging at his lips. It doesn't matter. Your husband comes from a wealthy family. Cheelin folded her arms, her dark eyes flashing with amusement rather than offense. Husband? Don't forget, she retorted, lifting her chin. I chose you. Running off isn't an option. With that, Ethan rose and stepped around the table. In one fluid motion, he swept an arm around Cheelin's slender waist and drew her close. The softness of her curves, the gentle rise and fall of her breath against his chest, Ethan found all of it intoxicating. Cheelin, unarmed yet undeniably lethal in her own right, seemed to melt into his embrace, her objections fading into a contented sigh. They stood for a moment, silhouettes against the cerulean glow of Blue Star's twin moons, locked in the comfort of familiarity. But elsewhere on the planet, a different drama was about to unfold. Angel Yan arrived at the Super Seminary under a cloak of urgency. Scrolls tucked beneath one arm, she hurried past towering pillars of crystalline blue, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Her mission was simple in purpose, but dire in consequence. She had to warn the Council that a great evil loomed on the horizon. All along, Angel had believed that Tianji King Hexi had departed shortly after completing his own secretive objectives here. She was stunned to learn that Hexi remained, drawn by an unexpected fascination with Ethan. Left unaware of Ethan's whereabouts, Hexi had only Ethan's last known image to guide him. But Ethan was clever. He'd employed an advanced transformation technique when he first arrived on Blue Star, subtly altering his appearance. His hair and eyebrows had been bleached pure white, and facial features sharpened in ways that left him unrecognizable from the strong-jawed man Cheelin knew. The ruse was so thorough that the king of Tianji might well conclude that all Kryptonians boasted alabaster hair. As Angel prepared to deliver her warning to the Grand Chancellor, the corridors buzzed with rumors. Some whispered of dark forces stirring in the ancient crystal forests. Others spoke of shifting allegiances among Blue Star's noble houses. But one thing was certain. With Ethan, or Luther, as Hexi still mistakenly called him, at the heart of these swirling mysteries, the balance of power here would never be the same. And under the serene glow of Blue Star's moons, the true changes were only just beginning. She couldn't confirm whether Ethan was still on Blue Star, but she had no evidence that he'd left either. Reluctant to abandon the search, she continued to monitor every fragment of dark plane data streaming from the planet. When a god of science and technology takes a case seriously, there's no half measures, especially in a universe where advanced tech borders on the miraculous. As the foremost deity of scientific research, she simply couldn't ignore Ethan's unique supergene profile. After uploading her preliminary findings to the core consciousness, she immediately received a massive boost in computing power. The core itself clearly shared her fascination. What laboratory might Ethan have established on Blue Star? Or was there a stray Kryptonian vessel hiding in orbit? She dove into the archives of the Dinor civilization and the Super Seminary on Blue Star, scouring logs, project files, even private correspondences. To her surprise, there was no record of Ethan's presence. Dinor 3, the planet's own supercomputer, boasted formidable processing capabilities, but it paled beside Hishi's divine intellect. Morgana, the roaming archive spirit, might slip in and out of any database at will, but Hishi wielded an even more unrestricted mandate. For now, the trail was cold. Yet with the core's reinforcements and her unyielding determination, Hishi knew it was only a matter of time before Ethan's secrets were laid bare. After eliminating the chance that a hidden Super Seminary or a secret Dinor enclave had sprouted on Blue Star, Hishi concluded there was only one place Etha, N, could be. Even if he'd somehow acquired fragments of the supergene engine, forging them into anything usable would take months, if not years. And with neither the astral wormhole network nor the worm bridge showing the slightest perturbation, it was almost certain he'd never left Blue Star's system. But Hasey's quest wasn't driven by mere curiosity. She was charged with safeguarding the future evolution of the angelic race. When she laid out her reasoning before Lady Auriella, the androgynous custodian of the Sacred Knowledge Repository, Auriella readily approved the plan. She dispatched a cadre of seraphic scouts to locate Ethan in person. The repository's arcane scanners, bound by cosmic law, could not penetrate his latent dark plane signature, so they would gather data the old-fashioned way, by watching his every reaction. Every trial he faced, every subtle aura shift would be recorded in the repository's luminous data crystals. From those indirect measurements, the gods of science could deduce the hidden parameters of his dark plane energy. It wasn't that the Pantheon lacked the will to wrest dark plane readings from him. It was simply beyond their present capabilities. Fortunately, the scientific deities possessed myriad other stratagems for teasing secrets from even the smallest interactions. With her seraphs poised for deployment, she steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. The fate of Angelus, and perhaps the entire cosmos, depended on finding Ethan and uncovering the mysterious power he held. Ethan's dragon was maddeningly elusive. He had no idea how it vanished in an instant, thwarting every attempt to track it and leaving his allies scrambling for answers. Had Ethan himself dared to appear openly, even while masking his dark plane aura, an inquisitor like she would have sucked up every scrap of information within moments. And facing angels honed by millennia of wisdom, that was a battle he wasn't ready to fight. Better, he decided, to remain hidden, to adopt a disguise, and limit his exposure. In the original animation adaptation, the producers and scriptwriters barely captured his true presence. But now, in real life, angels like she and Kaisha proved far tougher to deal with than anyone had anticipated. Drawing on the bravado of Panjen's most unforgettable line, Ethan placed a hand over his heart and declared, "These veins have pulsed for 10,000 years." Even whispered, it sent a shiver through the room. Thanks to Ethan's covert mission, the balance of power on Blue Star was already shifting, so subtly that even the visiting Demon Queen hadn't noticed. Meanwhile, Morgana wandered through the bustling marketplace, sampling skewers of sizzling barbecue and basking in the planet's decadent, chaotic freedom. "I like it here," she murmured to Death Carl at her side. "When do you think you can teleport in my #1 demon?" The situation was urgent. With demon #1 at her side, Morgana felt invincible, but Death Carl was more cautious. He lowered his voice. "Your Majesty," he began, "you know Holy Keisha is watching me. If I activate the Great Clock, she'll discover everything." Morgana bristled at the formality. "Don't call me that," she snapped. "You will address me as Your Majesty." Death Carl smiled faintly and bowed. "As you wish, Your Majesty, but I don't care about Blue Star anymore. Even if I abandon it, I'll still be restricted. So send Demon #1 to me as soon as possible." Morgana ground her teeth. Their alliance wasn't built on friendship, it was a cold bargain. Morgana needed a cache of rare materials to resurrect her fallen lieutenants, and those were exactly the resources Death Carl controlled. In return, Carl required Holy Keisha to be taken offline so he could resume his void research and harvest void matter. His project was nearly complete. All he needed was the final burst of energy strong enough to shatter a black hole, an experiment Holy Keisha would never permit. She was the one obstacle standing in his way, and decades of mutual hatred made compromise impossible, so they'd struck a deal, each playing their part in the other's grand design. Morgana had never trusted Carl, the god of death. They had once been on the verge of a union, but without a word, Carl dissolved into nothing more than an illusion. To Morgana, that disappearance felt like the ultimate betrayal, so she rejected him completely, growing to hate and even fear him. The truth was that Carl's love for Morgana was anything but ordinary. As a scholar of the void, he felt no earthly urges. He simply wished to transform into pure illusion alongside her, to wander the cosmic unknown together and unlock the universe's deepest truths. Morgana, however, lived for freedom, decadence, and sensual pleasure. She couldn't conceive of spiritual love. How could love endure if it knew no longing, no passion to keep it alive? Her fear sprang from that very doubt. If Carl harbored no desire, how long could his devotion last? Without the warmth of emotion to sustain it, what kind of love was he offering? Now Morgana walked on edge, convinced that any moment Carl might turn his powers lethal, or vanish again, leaving her behind. Death, Carl never complained. He endured Queen Morgana's scoldings without a word, and when she squeezed him for more resources, he simply shrugged. There was always plenty to spare. "Understood, Queen Morgana. I'll handle it right away," he said with a resigned sigh. Morgana acknowledged him curtly and ended the communication. Ethan couldn't believe his eyes when he rounded the corner. There, standing in the mid-afternoon bustle, was the Demon Queen herself, though these days she went by Liang Bing. Even without activating his supercomputer mind, he recognized her instantly. Ethan stared at Morgana with barely concealed envy, but it wasn't her reputation as the universe's greatest villain that fascinated him. It was her technology. Morgana had just upgraded to a fourth-generation divine body. Unlike the sacred atom vessels supposedly impervious to even a supernova's blast, hers retained just enough atomic cohesion to survive ordinary hazards, and no more. Making her atoms truly indestructible would have crippled her ability to slip through wormholes. Transporting a body composed of impervious matter would demand absurd amounts of energy and resources. And resources were exactly what Morgana's demon civilization lacked. It was the poorest society in the known cosmos, and Morgana herself was by far its most cash-strapped archdeity. She simply couldn't afford to pour cosmic credits into perfecting every last particle of her divine form. Besides, she'd rather not draw the attention of Carl, the god of death, with extravagant experiments. Morgana and Carl already had an awkward history, and she preferred to keep her distance. For Ethan, Morgana's wormhole drive schematics held some interest, but it was her fourth-generation divine body blueprint that truly intrigued him. Even if a fifth-generation version appeared tomorrow, the gold content, the raw power and elegance of her design would still outshine anything newer. And that was precisely what Ethan intended to study next. Ethan reviewed the data from Huayé's latest display. There wasn't any real qualitative leap. At best, Huayé's body had reached a 4.5 generation level, and even he admitted it was only just scraping into the fifth-generation tier. All that remained for Ethan was to figure out the right approach and clear a few technical hurdles. His own supercharged intellect could handle the rest. He tapped his chin. "Should we capture Morgana for research?" he mused. He felt no sympathy for the Demon Queen. Her cruelty sickened him. Despite the fact that this realm wasn't the one he'd left behind, Ethan still recoiled at Morgana's casual bloodshed. If her victims had hailed from some rival kingdom, he might have been indifferent. Hell, he could have advised her to cross the sea and set up shop on a remote island where the human toll wouldn't stir so much outrage. "None of this has happened yet," he reminded himself, "but that doesn't mean I can't experiment." A spark of excitement lit his eyes. Morgana had just achieved a fourth-generation divine body, her greatest power ever, but she was at her most vulnerable too. Without Demon Lord Nomer 1 present to back her up, she rose to unprecedented heights, even as her defenses were at their thinnest. That made her the perfect subject. Without the support of Demon Number 1, the celestial-level supercomputer, Morgana could rely only on her gene engine system in battle. Without her primary backup, no one could say for certain whether she'd grown stronger or slipped from her prime. One thing, however, was clear. Even a weakened Demon Queen posed no challenge to Ethan's 500,000-point Kryptonian might. He glanced over at Cheelin, who was still scrolling through her phone. "It's getting late. I'll drive you home." Cheelin looked up in surprise. "Home already? We've barely finished dinner. We could stop by that new boutique down the street." Ethan offered a teasing half-smile. "Got somewhere better to be?" She toyed with the hem of her jacket. "I could." "No chance," he cut in, mock stern. "I'm not letting you brave the streets alone. I don't trust taxis." He'd already sealed away Morgana's lingering aura, and although a spark of impatience tugged at him, his only priority was making sure his wife got home safely. Cheelin noticed he seemed perfectly fine, apart from that slight crease between his brows, and with a resigned shrug, she slid into the passenger seat. By the time they arrived at her apartment building, the city lights had fully awakened. Cheelin unfastened her seatbelt. "Thanks for the ride. See you tomorrow." Before she stepped out, she leaned across and planted a soft kiss on Ethan's cheek. He watched her disappear inside, a warm smile tugging at his lips. Cheelin had steeled herself for a greasy, barbecue-drenched kiss, but instead found Ethan's mouth surprisingly fresh. She stared the whole time, yet never once saw him slip away to brush his teeth. She could only admit it was a pleasant surprise, a moment she'd savor. As they parted, Ethan grinned and teased, "See you tomorrow, wife." Thanks to the biofield woven into his genes, Ethan remained spotless, but Cheelin wasn't so lucky. Even super gene warriors couldn't stay perpetually clean unless they stopped eating, drinking, and breathing. No built-in self-cleaning system existed. After Cheelin walked away, Ethan spun on his heel and murmured, "Shift." With that command, he activated his transformation ability. His hair and eyebrows lightened to a pure white and cropped themselves into a neat, short style. Subtle shifts in his brow bones and cheekbones added sharper angles to his face, giving him an entirely new profile. He wasn't unhandsome before. His previous look was the result of meticulous genetic optimization and self-sculpting, but this adjustment altered his appearance so drastically that he could pass for a stranger. It was under this new guise that he intended to meet He-She. This wasn't a trick from the Southern Transformation Academy. It was genuine Dragon Ball sorcery, a disguise and shapeshift spell that outclassed the Academy's version in every respect. Zeroing in on Morgana's aura, Ethan blinked into existence at her side. Morgana had been enjoying the nightlife of Blue Star, a sizzling skewer in one hand as she surveyed the planet's glow below. No wormhole shimmer gave him away. Before she could even blink, Ethan's grip snapped onto her cheek. In the same instant, they vanished from Blue Star and reappeared on the iron-red plains of Mars. Boom! Ethan slammed Morgana into the Martian soil. She gasped as her body buckled under the force, then straightened instantly, thanks to her fourth-generation divine physiology. "What sorcery is this?" she hissed, summoning her genetic system to probe the invasion and sift for dark plane residue. But Ethan cut her off without hesitation. Chi wave. He thrust out his palm, and a titanic blast of ki erupted, blasting tens of millions of tons of Martian regolith skyward in a single thunderous pulse. A blinding radiance washed over Mars, its cataclysmic energy blast snuffing out the planet's relentless dust storms. The superheated air spiked by hundreds of degrees, scorching the surface. When the glare finally faded, a gaping rift, an otherworldly echo of Earth's East African Rift Valley, split the scarred landscape. Ethan stood at the edge of that immense chasm, his expression calm. Angel Flame Barrage can incinerate even a third-generation apex beast, he reminded himself, let alone one fueled by chi. He strode into the rift's depths where the demon queen Morgana lay wounded. Her lower body had been obliterated by raw chi, leaving only her upper torso intact. Morgana's eyes shot open in shock. Who are you?" she managed to hiss. Had she not thrust her twin demon claws up at the last moment, Ethan's strike would have sheared her in two. Even so, her signature weapons, once every bit a match for the silver wings of the holy Keshes, were cracked and scarred. A wave of pain washed over her as she realized the true scale of his power. "I'm ready to help polish the entire chapter, but I need the full text first. Could you please provide the full machine-translated chapter you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have it, I'll revise it into coherent, idiomatic English, renaming Luther to Ethan and ensuring he's consistently portrayed as male." Chapter 60, Robbing and Blackmailing the Demon Queen. Only a solar flare powerful enough to kill a god could have caused this level of devastation. After all, Ansuyan hasn't achieved true invulnerability. She'd still be annihilated by a blast of that magnitude. Yet the shockwave that just struck Morgana carried precisely that god-killing force. Strange though it was, her gene engine system registered no nuclear fusion signatures or dark energy surges. By the time she realized something was wrong, it was far too late. The gods and super warriors of the Super Seminary have grown dangerously complacent, relying wholly on their gene engine readings and supercomputer analyses. In their eyes, an attack without a clear dark energy footprint simply doesn't warrant attention. Morgana's lips curled in a grimace as she surveyed the wreckage of her throne room. When had she ever dared to provoke someone with this kind of power? A calm, unhurried voice cut through the stunned silence. "Demon Queen Morgana, supreme deity of the demonic civilization, I've come for your technology." Ethan stood among the ruins, watching Morgana's expression flicker between fury and fear. He recognized the ruined half of her torso. It was his handiwork. Without the support of Demon One, she couldn't regenerate the missing pieces. And even if she still had Demon One at her side, her resources were too depleted to effect repairs. Such was the fatal flaw of a fourth-generation divine body. Incredible power, but crippling vulnerability once that power was broken. Ethan hovered in the shimmering aura of his divine body, absorbing ambient energy to replenish his reserves. But even that extraordinary process couldn't meet his needs. His power demands far outstripped those of a third-generation divine body. Just look at Angel Yan. She was dragging a half-dead third-generation warrior behind her, every step a testament to how quickly ordinary wells of power could be exhausted. For the Queen's arsenal? Morgana's tone quavered in surprise. She'd never considered it. Why would anyone dare steal from the Demon Empire's vault? They were one of only a handful of super-divine civilizations in the known universe, and Morgana herself had only recently ascended to a fourth-generation divine body. Surely no one would be brazen enough to rob her people. "It's your uncle's handiwork, isn't it?" Morgana snarled. Ethan said nothing. He formed a chi projectile in the space between his palms and unleashed it. The bolt of condensed energy struck Morgana in the jaw with a thunderous boom. She was sent sprawling across the stony floor. Her momentum only halted when her devil claws instinctively lashed out and gripped the cavern wall. Before she could gather her wits, Ethan strode forward, every step resonating with latent power. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Your processing capacity can't keep up. You can't summon your claws fast enough to block my attacks. So here's your choice. Be quiet and hand over the artifact, or I'll reduce you to dust for your insolence." "Your Majesty," Ethan said, his voice as cold as steel, "how am I supposed to trust that the moment you get what you want, you won't betray us and slaughter everyone?" Morgana's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, Ethan," she replied evenly. "Would you rather see the entire demonic civilization erased? Or are you counting on your former lover having a backup of the Dark Plains archives, hoping you'll even return as yourself when the resurrection comes?" Ethan fell silent. A faint glow of chi shimmered around his outstretched palm, the air rippling with barely contained force. Morgana felt that familiar prickle at her spine. She knew all too well how lethal this energy could be. It could obliterate a divine body in an instant, like a pinpoint solar flare detonation, silent, invisible, utterly devastating, and only Ethan wielded it. Confronted with such power, Morgana realized she was momentarily cornered. She'd intended to send a covert signal to Karl, the god of death, but doing so under Ethan's watchful gaze would be foolish. Swallowing her pride, she resorted to diplomacy. "All right," she said, lowering her voice. "I don't hold the full archive myself. Everything you need is hidden within Demon One. Once we recover him, you'll have every scrap of information on the Dark Plane." The chi around Ethan's hand dimmed, though his stare remained unbroken. Morgana allowed herself a thin, calculating smile. She'd bought herself time and a slim opening to contact Karl without revealing her true hand. Ethan felt a flicker of confidence. "When the time comes, Karl, the god of death will have his way with me," he thought. But before the words even formed, a cold voice rang out. "Wrong answer." He didn't hesitate. Raising his hand, he unleashed a crackling wave of qigong energy. "Hold on a second!" Morgana shrieked, scrambling to plead for mercy, but it was already too late. The blast struck her infernal claws dead on, turning her prized weapons into nothing but smoking slag. "No!" Morgana howled, tears of fury and grief springing to her eyes. Her beloved claws, her greatest source of pride and power, had just been destroyed. Even the burns searing her flesh barely registered as she lay sprawled on the ground, panting with rage. "You're not human," she spat, her voice trembling. "You're more wicked than any demon." Ethan took a single step forward and planted his boot firmly on the back of her head. He smiled, his voice low and unyielding. "Last chance. If you think you can, kill your queen now." Morgana's eyes blazed. "Goodbye, then," she snarled, preparing to strike. Ethan drew in a slow breath and gathered an even larger qigong wave in his palm. "Damn," he muttered, "you really mean it." For a moment, Morgana hesitated, intimidated by the unwavering resolve in his eyes. He had spoken, he had acted, and now there was no turning back. Only Karl, the god of death, knew that Morgana had secretly ascended to a fourth-generation divine body, Ethan could not have anticipated it. And yet, Ethan showed no hesitation at the thought of ending her life and walking away, leaving her utterly powerless. Morgana had originally planned to let Carl retrieve her essence from the Dark Plane's backup archives, trusting she could be resurrected later. But now she trembled at the thought of what Carl might actually do with her soul. Would he not simply slaughter her? Vote! Click! Surrender! Ethan's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. Morgana's hand hovered for a moment before she pressed the virtual surrender button. Ethan remained silent, his expression unreadable. Fear stabbed at her chest. "Don't test my patience," he warned, his tone as cold as the void around them. For now, he stilled his murderous intent. There was no rush. Once the transfer was complete, Morgana would still have nowhere to run. Ethan had no particular attachment to her life. Casting her aside later would be as easy as sending her on her way now. Morgana exhaled, a mix of relief and humiliation flooding her veins. She was not afraid of death itself. She feared for her people. She could not bear the thought of the entire demon civilization vanishing, or worse, falling under Carl's dominion. With a reluctant flourish, Morgana began uploading her divine matrix and all the secrets of her people. But when she finished, she realized with a choke that Ethan had never built an interface for the Dark Plane. There was no conduit for her essence to pass through. For the first time, Morgana's hope flickered, and Ethan's cold smile told her everything she needed to know. "It's not impossible for your super brain to process it," Morgana said, her voice carefully measured. "The problem is that gods like me never prepared for this scenario. We can only push data into your gene engine system or feed it through your supercomputer. There's no direct neural link between us. So how about you visit my #1 demon? I swear I bear you no ill intent." Ethan leveled a cool gaze at her. Had she forgotten who he was? He didn't need to traipse into a demon's domain or unlock hidden protocols in his gene engine or supercomputer just to receive knowledge. "No," he said firmly. "Just show me everything you know, right now." Without waiting, Ethan tapped into his superbrain, ready to absorb every scrap of Morgana's lore and technique. The Queen hesitated, momentarily at a loss. "You're being overly cautious," she murmured. "Do you have any idea how much arcane data and technology I possess? It could take decades to explain it all." "I said do it," Ethan interrupted, his patience wearing thin. What she didn't realize was that his systems existed solely in his own mind. There was no external engine or computer to breach. He relied entirely on his prodigious intellect. Stripped of options, Morgana summoned the last reserves of her divine power. In an instant, a shimmering projection sprang to life between them. Swirling runes, complex schematics, and eldritch diagrams floating in midair, bathing the chamber in an otherworldly glow as she began to reveal her secrets. She was astonished by how quickly Ethan learned, and by just how expertly he handled the supercomputer and the gene engine system.